Okay, I'm seeing our council coming on. We've got some sort of housekeeping things to get. I'm seeing all our council members except for Councilmember Hall. And what I'll do is if Cammie, if you're ready, we'll get rolling and then hopefully he'll come on, but we've got a quorum to get moving and can get through some of our housekeeping items here. We're going to have a very packed meeting, so we'll try to keep things on the rails and focused, and with our comments and presentations, if we all keep a sort of a focus on and a watch on the time, we'll be able to move through this and I think get to our end before 9 o'clock. So that's our goal. We'll work towards that. I'd like to welcome folks to the City of St. Helena regular City Council meeting, Tuesday, January 11th, 2022. And Cammie, will you help us let the public know about our remote access and Spanish language interpretation, please?
Yes, I'd be happy to. Before I do that, I just wanted to announce to the public that tonight's meeting will not be live streamed on the website. We are having some technical difficulties with our YouTube channel, but we will be live streaming on channel 28. And in regards to public participation, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, to participate in public comment by phone, please dial 669-900-6833 and at the prompt, enter our meeting ID 873-7964-2682 and press pound. Then during public comment, press *9 to speak. Tonight's meeting will have live Spanish interpretation. To access the interpretation, you will need to use the Zoom application from either your cell phone, tablet, or computer. Instructions on how to use the Zoom app are listed in English and Spanish on the agenda posted on the city's website. Once you join the meeting from the Zoom application, you will see a small globe at the bottom or top of your screen. Click on the globe and you will be able to access the live interpretation. Julie and Francisco are our interpreters this evening.
Thank you very much. Now we'll move to our Pledge of Allegiance. If folks could mute your microphones, put your hand on your heart and follow with me, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And we're at our roll call now.
Okay, Mayor Ellsworth.
Here.
Vice Mayor Doring.
Happy New Year, I'm here.
Councilmember Shuto.
Here.
Councilmember Hall.
Here.
And Councilmember Hardy.
Here.
Very good. And now we're at our adoption of the agenda. I'll look to our clerk to see if there are any changes to this evening's agenda.
There are no changes this evening.
And with that, then I'll look for a motion for adoption of the agenda.
I move approval of adoption of the agenda.
I'll second.
And roll call, please.
Councilmember Shuto.
Yes.
Councilmember Hall.
Yes.
Councilmember Hardy.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Doring.
Yes.
And Mayor Ellsworth.
Yes. Now we'll move to our public forum section where members of the public are entitled to speak on matters of municipal concern not on the agenda during this public forum. Each person's comment shall be limited to 4 minutes. Each person is entitled to speak on any non-agendized item only once at any meeting. Brief questions by council members for clarifications may be posed and answered, and council members may make requests that items be placed on future agendas, but in accordance with state law, no substantive discussion or action may take place unless and until the matter properly appears on the agenda. I'll look to our city clerk to see if there is any public comment at this point.
There is no public comment.
Okay, very good. We'll move now to our reports by staff and city council, future agenda items and AB 1234 reports. We'll look at to our city staff. First, our city attorney.
Good evening, Mayor. I have no report this evening.
Thank you. And to our city manager, Mr. Prestwich.
No report tonight. Thank you.
Okay, our finance director, Dr. Mitz.
Just want to let everybody know the city did receive notice at the first of the year. We did receive the Gfoa Award in Excellence for Financial Reporting. So it's a big accomplishment, a big thank you to Mandy Kellogg, who did a lot of work, and I just wanted to acknowledge that publicly. Thank you.
Thank you. Congratulations, and thank you for the ongoing and terrific work. Very much appreciated. So we'll move now to our city clerk.
Nothing to report.
Our public works.
Just working on getting our interconnection, our intertie with Napa Water, working on their facilities and our facilities as well.
Very
That's
good.
it.
Thank you. And our planning and building.
Good evening, Mayor. Nothing to report.
Okay, thank you. We'll move now to council members. We'll look first to Council Member Hall.
Nothing really to report other than tomorrow, the Tourism Improvement District will be holding its regularly scheduled meeting again. That's it.
Thank you. Councilmember Chateau.
Nothing to report. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Hardy.
I'll defer my reports to the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. And Vice Mayor Doring.
No updates. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, from me, just want to hope folks had a good holiday break and looking forward to what hopes to be an excellent new year. Remind folks we still have COVID with us, so we need to stick with our COVID protocols, the washing hands, wearing masks, watching our distance, vaccines, boosters. We need to, do our work to make sure our healthcare professionals have the capacity. So just want to keep that on folks' radar. And then also touching in with the Fire Safe Council and hoping to have them at an upcoming meeting to give us a presentation very soon. And then I got news today about an event that will happen in a few months on April 8th, but it's a mariachi event, youth mariachi event. We did it a number of years ago. And if everything holds well with COVID, that will be upcoming. And it's a very exciting event that I just heard about that we were able to move something forward to have that happen in St. Helena. So more news on that later. And great job on the Gfoa award to our finance department. And with that, then we'll look at our presentations and public recognitions. Seeing none, we'll move through past staff briefings to consent items. Oh, and I'm sorry, looking back at police and fire, do we have any reports from our police and fire?
Thank you, Mayor. The police department has nothing to report tonight.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Mr. Mayor, can I just add one thing?
Absolutely.
I thought maybe the planning would talk about this, but there is a community workshop coming up on January 20th regarding housing and to review some of the selected sites that the housing consultant and the focus group have been analyzing. So I hope everyone can attend that. I believe it's at 6 p.m. I could stand corrected if that's not the case, but we'd like to have some community participation as we review and try to hone in on selected housing sites. Thank you.
Very good. And so I'll look to our planning department. We'll have some messaging out regarding that.
Yes, we actually already posted a press release last week, and we also do an email blast, and we have some special groups we're reaching out to on that. But thank you, Vice Mayor, for that reminder to the community. We are hoping to get robust turnout. It's a very important meeting.
Very good. Thank you. And thank you, Vice Mayor Doring, for bringing that to our attention. With that, we'll move to our consent calendar. This is where members of the council or public may ask that any items be considered individually for purposes of considering alternative action, for extended discussion, or for public comment. Unless that is done, one motion may be used to adopt all recommended actions. And so as I move through, If somebody would like to pull it, please, in either the council or in the general public, please make that known. I had asked for item 9.2 to be pulled, and then I will read through the rest of the items, and if somebody would like one pulled, please say so. 9.1, 9.3, 9.4, and 9.5. And I'm seeing, Cami, are we seeing anything from the public?
I do see a hand raised. Leslie, I'm going to allow you to speak. You should be able to unmute yourself and address the council.
Yes, hi. I was going to ask that 9.2 be pulled off consent so I can hear some discussion since there is some controversy over more waste, especially at Whitehall Lane. Thank you.
Thank you. So with that, with 9.2 pulled, I will then, seeing no other hands up, look for a motion on the rest of the consent calendar.
So moved.
And a second.
Second.
And a roll call, please.
Okay, Vice Mayor Doring,
Yes.
Councilmember Hardy,
Yes.
Councilmember Hall,
Yes.
Councilmember Shuto,
Yes.
and Mayor Ellsworth.
Yes. So that passes our consent calendar. So we'll move back to item 9.2. And I don't know if.
Excuse me, Mayor. I'm going to recuse myself from this discussion since the topic is the JPA, and my wife's company is mentioned in this conversation. Cami, if you wouldn't mind giving me a call back or texting me when you're ready.
Yes.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. So I pulled this and I want to be brief. I don't want to belabor this, but I had some questions, some comments, and I'll just sort of begin with a little bit of a statement, and then I had just a few questions. My concerns go to continue to go to fire risk and risk to our water supplies in terms of looking at waste trade periodicals. It's apparent that professional opinion recognizes the inherent fire risks of landfills and waste sites. And my concerns are if we're bringing in more waste or additional waste is coming in, have we done the proper fire risk analysis and the water risk analysis? One of the concerns I have is that if the oversight or conversation is not comprehensive, in a sense, if the fire people aren't talking to the water people, do we know what the possible impacts could be? One of the examples of this is if fire suppression equipment is in place, is it water-based or is it chemical-based? And both of those might have certain impacts on water quality in the area if there were an incident. So I know that there's a timeliness to SB 1383 getting passed, but my understanding is that there's another provision, I believe it's SB 6819, and this is where I'll look to our city attorney, that might give a few more months to sort of analyze the situation. My concern is with these locations. And I know that, in a sense, we defer to the JPA for oversight on this, but since this company is so sort of systemically connected to our city, I want to sort of see how we can have a conversation to really understand what's going on and make sure that it aligns with our city policies, our city goals, et cetera. So if I could just look to our city attorney and just to understand about 619, does that give some buffer time to consider this?
Thank you, Mayor. So that bill, what that bill did is under SB 1383, there was a requirement that we adopt an ordinance to implement the goals of SB 1383, which are, they actually center around diversion of food waste from the landfill and from our general waste stream, and mechanisms kind of within our jurisdiction to allow for the diversion of food waste. But in terms of SB 1383 had a provision that would implement fines starting at the first of this year if the city had not adopted an ordinance by the end of last year. And then what 619 did is it allowed for an agency to adopt a resolution saying it needed additional time to implement the ordinance and potentially get relief from those fines, but it has to do that by March 1st. And so what many cities have done, including ours, is we went a bit past the deadline with the intent of adopting the ordinance before that March 1st deadline. If we don't act by that March 1st deadline, we run the risk of retroactive penalties to the start of the year. So while we do have a bit of time, we don't have very much. And I would just note, the policy issues that you're raising are certainly something that the city can talk about, but this ordinance specifically relates to food diversion within the city and how we can implement that and have enforcement mechanisms to ensure that food is diverted from the waste stream per the directive of SB 1383.
Do we know if, and maybe perhaps our liaisons from the JPA have some comment or some insight, the food waste that's being accrued from the city, is it going to both Clover Flat and Whitehall Lane? And is other food waste coming in a sense from out of the region as well, or is it just local food waste? Those are the two questions I would have.
I can't answer that question. I would defer to, I don't know if Councilmember Chateau could answer it, but.
I need more time, Mayor Ellsworth. I would have loved if you'd given me that question ahead of time. I can certainly get you those statistics and numbers. I just needed a heads up. So I'd be happy to get that to you and report at the next meeting. I didn't know that was going to be your specific question. I can't address your fire concern because there was an email that Steve Letter responded to all of the council. So there were some points since you raised that tonight. So the Clover Flat landfill operates under an approved fire control plan that's approved by CAL FIRE, County Fire, and an operating permit issued by the state, Cal Recycle. It is inspected monthly by the County Environmental Health Department for compliance. So you also asked about what are the fire prevention, fuel load mitigation, and water protection measures to address the increased volumes. The response back we all got was that Clover Flat landfill operates under permits from Cal Recycle and the Regional Water Quality Control Board. The site is inspected monthly for compliance with fire prevention requirements and water protection measures or regulations.
Okay, thank you. And I guess it goes to my sort of hoping we can open up a conversation perhaps with the JPA to make sure that those agencies are coordinating with each other to make sure that there's a sort of comprehensive look at the oversight. The other aspect that I do think is important is looking at our city, council vision and mission statements and making sure that everybody we partner with is aligned with those. And so with the JPA being sort of a remote body with oversight over an entity that's, really ingrained in the city, how can we maybe have a further conversation? And so perhaps that can be a next step as, looking past this issue here, how can we work together with the JPA to make sure that there's an alignment with the vision statement of the city? One of the things that's coming up a little later tonight, we're going to be talking about our DEI, our diversity, equity, and inclusion programs as they may relate to our nonprofits and our grant programs. And so my hope is that all of our city partners can sort of come to the table and talk about how we look at our city mission statement in terms of fire, water, the diversity issues, climate, and so that we make sure that we're aligned because we don't have a direct oversight. So if we have some ability to influence the oversight body to say, this is our mission statement, and making sure decisions are aligned. That's my hope. So frankly, where I am, I'm not comfortable moving forward yet. I think I'm gonna open this to public comment. And I'll look to our city clerk.
There is no public comment.
Okay, thank you. I'm not feeling comfortable, but I recognize I may be on the minority with that, but I just wanted to make sure to put those points out there, that I believe we need further conversation about comprehensive oversight, et cetera. With that, I'll call the question to see if anybody would like, or I'll look for council comment as well. I'm seeing Councilmember Hardy.
Thank you, Mayor Ellsworth. I can't say that I've studied exhaustively, but I have read the ordinance in front of us with agenda item 9.2 from beginning to end. And I'm unable to find or think of anything in there that is directly connected to your concerns, Mayor Ellsworth. So I'm honestly baffled by your statement that you can't support what's in front of us unless we have a discussion by things that aren't affected by the ordinance one way or another.
I guess just to clarify it, for me, really, it's about the combustibility of the material. And if the fire analysis has been comprehensive with the sites where the material is going to be processed in conjunction with potential impacts to water. I have not seen, to me, what feels like a comprehensive look at the combustibility aspect, and which food waste compost has is an inherent risk.
Well, I don't want to belabor it, but I'm not sure you understood what I was saying. This ordinance doesn't have any effect on operations at Clover Flat. It is required by law in order to address the requirement that the city act in accordance with the state law that requires diversion of food waste. So again, I'm, and perhaps staff can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't find anything in the ordinance that implicates your concerns in any tangible way. So it sounds to me like what you're asking for is a discussion of things unrelated to the ordinance that's in front of us. And that does confuse me. Frankly, it troubles me some too.
Well, thank you for your comments. And I believe maybe we have a disagreement about where it's connected, but since this is the company that we're mandated to use to implement this action, and as I look at it, I'm not fully comfortable that there's been a full analysis of the combustibility factors at these locations where the waste will be processed that is being, this item relates to. I recognize we may not agree this evening and we may not concur, but I wanted to make sure I put these comments forward.
Okay, well, just to make it more clear, what I've concluded is that you're addressing your comments to the wrong forum, and that if you want them appropriately addressed in front of this council, you need to have an agenda item that covers that. Otherwise, your concerns are all about the operational requirements over which the city has no jurisdiction and which are unaffected altogether by the ordinance in front of us. But that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, we may be at some disagreement there. With that, seeing no public comment, is there any additional council comment? And I'm seeing none. And so with that, is there a motion?
I move approval of the proposed adoption of SB 1383 ordinance.
Do we need in some way to acknowledge or waive the second reading as part of that motion, Mr. Walsh?
That would be preferred, yes. So if Councilmember Chateau, if you would be willing to amend your motion to waive the second reading of the proposed ordinance and move approval.
Yes.
And a roll call, please.
I'll second it first. That may help.
Here we go. Thank you.
Oh, Councilmember Chateau,
Yes.
Councilmember Hardy,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Doring,
Yes.
and Mayor Ellsworth.
No. Thank you. And Cami, could you ring Councilmember Hall and let him know we're back to our session?
Yes, just one moment.
Thank you. Councilmember Hall should be on in just a moment. Okay, I'm seeing Councilmember Hall connecting. Okay, Councilmember Hall is back with us, so we'll proceed. We're now at items 10, public hearings. That is going to be continued, item 10.1. We go now to item 11.1 under old business. This is consideration and proposed approval of one, amendments to the nonprofit grant program guidelines and program application to include City Council Goal 5F, supporting youth and family, and Goal 3B, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Initiative, and 2, a resolution establishing funding guidelines and annual appropriations for Boys and Girls Club, Rienda House, and Up Valley Family Centers. And this was prepared by Mandy Kellogg. Is Mandy with us tonight, or is somebody else presenting this evening?
She is not here tonight. I will actually be presenting, and then both myself and City Manager Prestwich will be available for any questions.
Great, thank you.
So I do have a brief presentation. So if everyone can see my PowerPoint, I think it's up. Okay, so quick presentation on this program. This program, the current nonprofit funding policy, and this was updated in October 2018, and this program is currently the current funding for the nonprofit grants in the fiscal year 2021-22, which we're currently in. This is how the program is set up. So we have two types of grants. We have programmatic, and we also have community enrichment. So the programmatic grants were set up for projects or programs which provide support services to the residents of the city of St. Helena. And under that grant category, people can apply for grants in the amount anywhere from $1,000 to $30,000. And the anticipated funding available for the current fiscal year that we're in before we went through the budget process was approximately $140,000. The second type of grant is a community enrichment. And so this is for projects which promote or benefit the St. Helena community with arts, culture, or education. And the grant amounts in this category could be applied for between $1,000 and $10,000 with the anticipated funding availability of $50,000. So when we went into the last budget year cycle, we were planning approximately $190,000 worth of grants between those two categories. The actual funding, it is important to note, for fiscal year 21-22, which we're currently in, is $209,500 $530. So a little bit of a background on why we're here tonight for this particular item in front of you is during the fiscal year 21-22 nonprofit grant program funding review, it was recommended to city staff to reevaluate the current program criteria for the upcoming fiscal year, which is 22-23. And part of that was to include City Goal 5, which is to support thriving families and enhance the safety, well-being, and healthy development of our youth, and also incorporate City Council Goal 3B, which is to identify and advance internal and community social justice, diversity, and inclusion initiatives. And then additionally, City Council did make the recommendation to amend the funding criteria to provide direct funding for Boys and Girls Club, Rianda House, and Up Valley Centers, because those are typically in the programmatic grant category. So it was recommended to actually take it out so they wouldn't have to keep reapplying year after year. So the recommended action tonight, and this is following meetings that city staff had with Mandy Kellogg, also with the city manager, and then the sub-working group of Council Member Vice Mayor Doring and also Mayor Ellsworth. So the program amendments before you tonight is to, one, create an emphasis on the city's diversity, equity, and inclusion, or the DEI strategy. Also to encourage proposals that identify and foster inclusion, belonging, and social justice. And then also to rename the program title to Nonprofit Community Enrichment Grant Program. So at that point, it is dropping the title of the programmatic grants. The application amendments. The application now includes a question on how the proposal and organization incorporates the principles of DEI, which is tied to City Council Goal 3B. In addition, the application criteria is updated to include a focus on projects or programs that support youth, family initiatives, and services, which supports City Council Goal 5F. In addition, the funding amendments is to provide direct funding to the Boys and Girls Club, Rianda House, and Up Valley Centers. And this will be done separately through a multi-year agreement with each agency, with $30,000 being designated, at least to start with, in fiscal year 2022 and 23 for a total of $90,000. And so that is the funding amendment. And then the final slide is, again, it touches, so this is, instead of having the programmatic and then the community enrichment grants, it would just be under one title of community enrichment grants. And it would be for projects or programs which promote or benefit the city of St. Helena community with arts, culture, education, or supporting youth and family initiatives and services. The recommended amount is $1,000 to $20,000 that each entity can apply for. And the anticipated funding for 2022-23 is $120,000. And the big difference is removing that $90,000 that went right over to the Rianda House Boys and Girls Club and Up Valley Centers. So with that, myself and City Manager Prestwich are open for any questions.
Very good. Thank you. Appreciate the presentation of this. Are there any initial council questions at this point or comments? I am seeing no hands. One of the things, for us to remember as we continue with this program, we're still as a community dealing with COVID recovery. We as much as we want to be helpful partners always, it's important for the community to understand that as the economy changes, as years go by, we have to be willing to adjust a bit as we go. But keeping these programs functioning and a benefit, I think, has been a real priority. And it's appreciated. Everybody that's participated and been able to sort of help be part of this community linked in with the city through the grant program. So first, I'll look once again for any additional council comment. And not seeing any, I will go to our public and see if there's any public comment on this.
There is no public comment.
Okay, so we'll bring it back, and I'm seeing Vice Mayor Doring.
Thank you, Mayor. I am focusing for your information on the program guidelines, the application criteria. It's in several different places. I'm on page 97 of the overall agenda package. I'm concerned about the language with respect to youth and family. It seems to be overly broad, and I don't believe that was not my intent. It just seems like it's going to encompass way more than we are intending it to be. It says projects or programs which promote or benefit the St. Helena community with arts, culture, education, or supporting youth and family initiatives and services. First of all, I'd say it should be or support youth and family. And then I would, if the council would allow, I would like to add the words health and well-being initiatives and services, youth and family health and well-being initiatives. Otherwise, it's really well beyond the intended scope of our nonprofit grants. And that would just be my concern, to tighten that up just a little bit. And I think it's consistent with other areas in the mission, the goals and the mission statement. I just don't want applicants to be led astray that it's any kind of a youth and family initiative. That's just too wide open, frankly, but that's my comment, and I'll defer to the council's wisdom on it.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I certainly support those changes. We can look to the rest of the council as well to see if there's some consensus there. I am not seeing any input here. I'm seeing Councilmember Hardy.
Well, this is just a procedural question for the city attorney or the city manager as to whether we can just orally modify the resolution for purposes of taking action in the evening, or whether this is something that will need to be brought back at a subsequent meeting. Thank you.
So I'll look to our city attorney.
You certainly can do that. I think it will depend kind of the level of detail and revisions that you want. It gets difficult if there are significant changes, but there's nothing that precludes you from doing that.
Well, I was just thinking about the change or changes proposed by Vice Mayor Doring. I wasn't looking to go further than that.
You could make those changes via motion.
Thank you. With that additional information, I'm certainly in support of Vice Mayor Doring's change, and with that change made, in support of the staff recommendation. I'm delighted to see this kind of attention towards moving our grant funding program forward as we come out of our COVID recession and look towards a bigger, stronger St. Helena. Thank you.
Thank you. And so the components of this we're looking at have to do with our diversity, equity, inclusion approach, DEI, and inviting folks submitting for these grants to show us how they're working on diversity, equity, and inclusion in their programs, so that there's an alignment. And so that's part of this. And then the other part is looking at long-term community partners, Rianda House, Boys and Girls Club, and Up Valley Centers, who've really provided critical social services over time. And so moving how that funding is coming to them, with the idea that others can also work with the city over time and perhaps get into that same position. But this is a sort of a starting place with that. So I'm not sure if I've called for public comment yet.
You did.
I did. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I think nobody spoke up. So is there any other council comment? Unless with that, I would entertain a motion. I'm seeing our city manager.
Before a motion, I want to make sure that we accurately document the recommended changes. And it would probably be helpful to read the sentence, Vice Mayor Doring, in the way you would have it read. I think I've captured 95% of this, but I want to make sure it's 100.
I possibly have the other 5%.
I'm scrolling to that page. Give me a moment. I'm on page 95, but it's here. Well, let's see, where am I? Nope, that's the old one. 97 is where I am. Projects or programs which promote or benefit the St. Helena community with arts, culture, education, or support youth and family health and well-being initiatives and services. So I'm just adding health and well-being and changing support team to support. That's it.
Okay. Do we have that, Mr. Prestwich?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. And so do we have a motion from Councilmember Hardy?
I move that we approve the resolution with the changes recommended by Vice Mayor Doring.
Second.
And a roll call, please.
Councilmember Hardy,
Yes.
Councilmember Hall,
Yes.
Councilmember Shuto,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Doring,
Yes.
and Mayor Ellsworth.
Yes. Thank you. And we look forward to getting the applications, and it's an exciting partnership that we keep building. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, council colleagues.
Very good. We'll move now to item 11.2. This is our update on the Napa Valley Vine Trail Alignment Study through St. Helena. And I am going to pass this to our city manager, Mr. Prestwich.
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight's discussion on the Vine Trail is really a check-in, and it's important for me to be really clear that tonight's focus is not to select a preferred route for the Vine Trail. And just to provide you an overview of the presentation and the sequencing of our conversation tonight, I want to walk us through that format. This item tonight is called for in the council's annual work plan. It states that we are to complete an analysis of the Vine Trail route options and facilitate decision-making on a preferred route. So the format tonight is I will review a recommended outreach process. I'm going to then turn it over to Dan Schaefer with BKF, who will review for the council 3 options. And this dates back to a point in time that preceded 2 of our council members when we set in motion 2 additional route options for the possible Vine Trail routing. So Mr. Schaefer will review those with us. Then we'll turn it over to Chuck McMinn, or representative of the Vine Trail, who will share with you some grant considerations as well as some thinking on some of the outreach that the Vine Trail's been participating in. And then we'll facilitate a discussion and seek direction on the council's interests moving forward. And I'm happy to answer any questions if any of that's unclear.
Mr. Prestwich, I saw the city clerk's hand up. I didn't know if she had something to interject.
Okay.
I just had noted that Julie Spencer from the Rionda House had raised her hand.
Oh, for the last item. Well, I think that item is closed. Perhaps we could have her send public comment as things move forward.
Yes.
Okay, thanks, because I think I had closed public comment. Okay, very good. So we'll move back to this. And so, Mr. Prestwich, you're going to hand it off Is that correct?
So, right, before I do that, I want to walk you through some recommended outreach. So the city council has not been presented with the three options. We have had a discussion at an informational briefing with our Parks and Rec Commission, also received some feedback from our Active Transportation and Sustainability Committee on concepts. The Vine Trail can share with you some of the meetings they've had with different stakeholder groups. But the city has never, has really not taken yet the step for stakeholder and community outreach. And so what we're recommending that's outlined in the staff report is a series of outreach steps that would include 2 Zoom virtual format community open houses, or community workshop is what I should refer those as. And then 2 additional drop-in format open houses. And since publicizing the agenda, I think we've had some additional thinking on this, that it would probably be more COVID friendly to have this done outside, perhaps at the Napa Valley College Upper Valley campus in the outdoor courtyard. There's some patio area that's covered, and that may be a more suitable alternative than the Carnegie Library, which is referenced in your staff report. And then 2 additional Zoom meetings specifically targeting businesses that are interested in the discussion. There has been 1 meeting conducted by the Chamber of Commerce. This would be 2 city-initiated outreach meetings. We would want to provide some direct invitations, whether that's a door hanger, a letter, some form of direct invitations to any residents living or businesses that are along any of the routes that are being discussed tonight. We would let them know of the outreach dates once we schedule those, this outreach we imagine would take place at least 2 weeks to 3 weeks from now minimum. But we do believe we can finish that outreach in approximately 4 weeks and bring the feedback that the community shares with us, aggregate some of that information and feedback, and share it with our Active Transportation and Sustainability Committee at their first meeting in early March. And we would recommend that the ATSC committee provide a recommendation on a preferred route through the city council, and what we anticipate is the opportunity to bring that back to you with a preferred route recommendation at your second meeting in March. So with that, let me turn it over to Dan Schaefer with BKF Engineers, and Mr. Schaefer will walk you through these alternatives.
So good evening, Honorable Mayor and City Council members. My name is Dan Schaefer. I'm going to go over these options here. If I can see, I'll share my screen.
Are you having an issue getting it up on the screen? Is there some way we can be helpful?
Yes, it says advanced sharing options. Who can share?
Perhaps Cami, our city clerk, can somehow.
We have a backup plan.
I made Dan a co-host so he could share his screen, but I'm happy to share it for you if you just let me know when to advance your slides.
Okay.
Okay, I'll go ahead and share my screen.
Okay, great. So again, we're looking at the Vine Trail route study through the St. Helena. Next slide. And really the study has 2 purposes. One is to identify a route on Main Street from Grayson to Pratt, and then identify opportunities and constraints for each of these route options. Next slide. So just as background, Caltrans has a lot of definitions on different types of bikeways. So there's a class 1 bikeway, and in general terms, that's a bike path. A class 2 is bike lanes, or lanes on streets. A class 3 is a bike route. Sometimes also it's called a shero. And a class 4 is a separated bikeway off of traffic. So I just want to make sure that those definitions are clear when we get started here. So next slide. So the trail goals for the Vine Trail is really to try to get a Class 1 trail where it's feasible. And where it's not feasible, then the second piece is to look at a Class 4 with sidewalks so that we get both pedestrians and we have cyclists within the same corridor. The second goal was to have a direct route through town with proximity to in-town destinations such as schools in the downtown business area. The third goal was to minimize conflicts with existing improvements, and that would be a way to reduce the overall cost. And then the fourth bullet here is to minimize parking loss. And so those were our 4 key trail goals in starting the study. Next slide. So this shows all of the different routes we analyzed at the beginning. The trail is really divided. We divided it into 3 separate segments. Segment 1 and segment 3 are shown on the right and the left. And segment 2 in the middle is where there are a lot of options and a lot of constraints. And so I think that's the critical piece. Segment 1 and segment 3, while there are some issues with those segments, there are a lot less impediments, if you will, to constructing improvements within those segments. So in segment 1, the idea would be to expand the existing sidewalk to create a shared path. And then in segment 3 would be put in a Class 1 facility, which would be parallel with the Vine train, and then on Pratt Avenue, have it be off the street and have a separated Class 1 trail. Next slide. And so you can see here's the segment. So we talked about segment 1 and segment 3. So the key segments here, we looked at a whole bunch of different options, and the key ones we looked at are really looking at along Oak and then along Church. And so the next slide. And so this shows those 3 different options. One is, you can see segment 1 coming up here in the red. The first option would be to take Oak from Mitchell Street up to Adams Street. And that would be with a Class 4 trail. Second option would be to continue up Main Street to Spring Street, and then take Spring Street down to Oak, and then up to Adams. And then the third more viable option was to actually go up to Church Street and then over to Church Street and then up along the Wine Trail corridor and connect back up into segment 3. Next slide. And so this shows a little bit more in detail how they would work, going down Mitchell and then looking at going down Oak. And there's a couple different options going down Oak, whether it's a Class 1 facility or a Class 4 facility. Both have some issues with, especially with parking lots. And so I think that was the key delineator here is trying to come up with options that would reduce parking, or trying to come up with, well, where could the parking be mitigated? Next slide. The next one is to go up to Spring Street, which would reduce a little bit of the parking loss on Oak Street. And then would use the same alignment up to Adams Street and then over toward the Vine Trail. Next slide. And then the third option is to go up Pope Street with the Class 1 trail, and then go along Church Street. And on Church Street, it would be a Class 4. So it'd be a designated 2-way cycle track with pedestrians on the sidewalk, and Church Street would need to become a 1-way street. And then it would go parallel with the railroad from there through Safeway or along the Safeway boundary edge to Adams, crossing Adams, and then taking the rail corridor up towards Grayson. Next slide. And so again, these are the 3 different segments, the 3 different options within that segment 2 and trying to look at the whole corridor and connecting at each endpoint where the trail is being stubbed to. Next slide. And so this is the last slide that I have, and it really looks at different issues about each one of the routes and about their complications and about, the potential relocation of parking, trying to get standard trail widths, trying to figure out how many conflicts we have, trying to determine an overall relative cost between the different options. And so it looked at all the different scenarios to try to come up with, what are the critical items with each alternative. And so that's the end of my presentation for tonight. We've got a lot of slides on details if there's interest in that, on what the conflicts are and what issues we can solve.
Thank you, Mr. Schaefer, and really appreciate the presentation. I'll go now back to our city manager. One of the things that had been mentioned was that there was a window on some grant funding, and I wanted to learn a little bit more about that and how that might align with our process here and where we are in that conversation.
Correct. And I think the best thing I can do is help introduce Chuck McMinn, who is affiliated with the Vine Trail. And Chuck can walk us through the grant opportunity that they're eyeing, as well as some timing issues related to that in their preparation.
Right. Thank you, Mark. And it's wonderful to be back here. We started this process in partnership with the city back in May of 2019. So COVID threw a few curveballs at us to actually get back here, but it's wonderful that we've been able to consummate the BKF study, and Dan and his crew did a wonderful job of enumerating all the different options. And I'll remind people why we did that. And for some of you, it's new because you weren't on the council when we started this. But in the old bike route for the city of St. Helena bicycle plan, there is a route for the Vine Trail, which is not a class 1 or a class 4. It is coming up on Main Street, going down Charter Oak, at the side of the road, not even wide enough for bike lanes, over Allison, down McCorkle, across Mariposa, down Pope for a few blocks, over Star, which could be a class 1, there's enough width there, and then through the Hunter parcel, and then over to Library Lane and back onto the Wine Trend right away. And as we got, and that was done maybe 10 years ago, we came up with that route in St. Helena. And subsequent to that, we opened up Yountville to Napa, and in the process just saw an explosion in use, that there was an 8-fold increase in the number of people using the Vine Trail between Yountville and Redwood Road along Solano Avenue. Then there were people using the sides of Solano Avenue before the trail went in. And so back in May of 2019, we all came together and said, let's see if we can do better through the city of St. Helena. Let's see if we can actually fit a class 1 or a class 4 someplace through the city. And the good news is there are, as Dan said, 3 different routes, 2 that involve Oak Street and 1 that involves Church Street, and they are not slam dunk easy to do. There are extenuating circumstances with both sides of Highway 29. The biggest issue, and I'll say, I guess maybe first of all, that we have been outreaching to the community, trying to get their input. We want to do this in an open and inclusive way. And we've met with the ATSC twice. We've met with Parks and Rec. We've met with over 25 members of the Chamber of Commerce in a Zoom they organized. We've met with the school district twice. And we've met with at least 20 owners of businesses and residences. And I will say that on the Oak Avenue side or the Oak Street side, the concern is about parking. And Dan, in that last slide, kind of said that there's somewhere between 45 and 55 parking spaces that would be lost and have to be mitigated in some way, shape, or form in order to preserve parking. I think there seems to be no appetite in the reduction of parking. We're already kind of tightly parked in the city of St. Helena. So the downside to a route on the Oak Street side is parking mitigation, and can we mitigate it, and is it good enough? And the advantage is that it's closer to the schools and the churches and the elementary school and the preschool, and that kids are an important part of the calculus. So there's an advantage and a disadvantage. On the Church Street side, the issue is turning Church Street into one way. I mean, the good news there is, at least from Hope to Hunt, there would be no loss of parking. It would just be a one-way street instead of a two-way street. So that doesn't have the same impact as Oak Street. So to be clear, the Vine Trail is happy with any of these three different alternatives. They both are a huge improvement over just sending kids and adults meandering down the streets of St. Helena. And again, we don't think about it as it's just the people who are already using those streets on bikes. It's for the 7 times as many people, 7 additional people for every one that use it, that would never think of letting their kids ride down any of those streets. That it's just not safe enough for the 50% of the population who say they're interested in biking or walking, but only if it's safe. So I think we have two different options. I would say the feedback that we've gotten from the community is a very, very big concern about parking mitigation. That would, kind of tilt everybody toward looking at the Church Street option a little, very seriously, to try to take it to the next level. I think Mark has a very good approach, and let's specifically outreach around anybody that would like to give us impact on Church Street. We have had plenty of impact about the route on Oak Street and its impact on parking. We have not heard a negative comment yet back from the community about Church Street, but I can't say that we have done enough to make sure that the community has the opportunity to give us feedback and are encouraged to give us feedback. And I think it would be wonderful for us to get that feedback.
Mr. McMahon, may I just interrupt for a moment? I'm seeing Councilmember Chateau with a hand up, and she may be wanting to address a point you just mentioned.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. I did meet with some of the people who live on Church Street that were concerned about it. And primarily, one of the big concerns was backing out and safety, being concerned about hitting bicyclists or people walking. So I wondered if you've seen something that could be done to mitigate that, if it's signs or what the thoughts are.
Well, I see.
My other question was, if it's one way, can the people who live there still be able to go out both ways? Is that something that's ever happened in another community?
No, I don't think that would. There are some things that have to be engineered once we pick the route, but in terms of backing out, it's no different than backing out onto the street now. You would not back across the street into the other lane of traffic necessarily. You would, attempt to stay in your own lane, and it would be the case that the residents who live there would only be able to go one way out of their driveway. I think that's the only way that it would fit in.
When I met with them, I was thinking that it could still be possible to consider a sharo, just knowing that it wasn't a class 4 everywhere. I know that's not your preference, but I just wanted to keep that open when meeting with the neighbors' concerns, just really hearing them out, since it is the one block that would be residential. It makes sense to me looking over there why that would be the preferred route. It aligns so well with where it just was very clean. It's close to Main Street, and then it aligns with where the trail starts right there by Safeway. Right. And also we have that little city park right there with a bathroom and with tables. Right. I could really see us putting nice signs there. If that could be worked into the grant for some improvements with locking up the bikes and making sure we encourage people to go downtown.
I think that would be a wonderful place for either a rest stop or a bike locker, or a place you could lock up your bike so you could then walk up and down Main Street.
Thank you. That's it for now.
And so getting more feedback back specifically from Church Street, and we would love to have those residents that you've talked to, council member, talk to us and give us their feedback as well. The other issue that we surfaced that hasn't been really addressed is what happens in the edge of the Safeway parking lot. Certainly the wine train will let us be on their property as much as they can, but there's certain, their right of ways relatively narrow there. So we would be looking to probably eke into the Safeway parking lot by a few feet. And we thought it was important to have that information about exactly what that geometry would be. And so the Vine Trail has engaged BKF specifically on our nickel to look at how that would work and would there be any impact on parking. The gut is that there won't be, but we want that confirmed by the engineering process. And hopefully in the next 30 days, as we go out for more feedback, we could also have the answer to the question about parking. I mean, about the geometry of the parking lot. And there are the other thing I will say, there's 2 private landowners that own those parcels, and they've got to be okay with this. It's the Vine Trail's position that any easement that would be required from them has to be voluntary. And we would only do this if we can convince those property owners that 500,000 new people going by on bikes might be pretty good for businesses, but also that it wouldn't interfere with their operations or take away any of their parking. So that's kind of what our thought process is. We love the idea of getting more input. I think regarding the mayor's question about the grant process, we applied for the biggest single grant pot of money is the Active Transportation Program, ATP. The Vine Trail's been successful in 2 ATP grants, totaling a collective, close to $10 million. The third grant we applied for last year was a grant from Yountville to the St. Helena city limits. And we did not get that grant. And we didn't get it because there are no communities of concern. There are no schools in that run. Yountville had shut down its only school. And so we believe that it'll be a much, much more powerful grant on the one hand, if we can say we're going all the way from Yountville to Pratt Avenue through St. Helena. And secondarily, it's getting that route nailed down, being able to include St. Helena in the next grant process will get the trail built more quickly through St. Helena and not have a gap were we to apply for it without the city's segment included. That grant process starts in April, and the grants are due in June. So we have to do a bunch of engineering work to get into positions to start writing about what these routes are. And so it really would put us under a time crunch if we don't have a route through St. Helena that we can include in the grant process by March. And maybe one final thing that I'll say before I start taking questions or from anybody about my ramblings is that I wanted to also introduce our new executive director for the Vine Trail, who's Sean Casey White, who's on the line here. As many of you know, our longtime executive director, Philip Sales, who's also here, retired as of December 31st. And Sean will be carrying the baton going forward for the Vine Trail. And hopefully she'll have a chance to meet many of you through this process and hear your thoughts and hear the community's thoughts as well.
Thank you. And welcome also, Ms. Casey White, for being here and looking forward to this process. So just in terms of alignment, I'm going to look at our city manager and then look back to Mr. McMinn. So if we're looking at a bit more outreach here to try to dial this in, and we think we can come in by March with something that will align with a decision-making process then?
That would be the goal.
We would expect to bring you a recommendation from the Active Transportation and Sustainability Committee at your second meeting in March. And with that direction moving forward on one of these options at that time, that provides enough time for the Vine Trail to submit that application.
Okay. I'm going to look for other council comment, then open it to public comment just to see where we are with that at this point. Yes.
Sorry, I'm just trying to work these controls.
Councilmember
Just
Hall.
One quick question. So let's say the ATSC has a recommendation for the council in late March. It looked like in going through the staff report that the city would need about 1 month for its outreach, the Zoom meetings and sort of community workshops that you referenced. So that means that we would need, basically, it sounds like Well, wait, so the council would make the recommendation when? When does the council need to select a route and still meet our grant timeline?
Is that the first
That
or
would
second?
be on March 28th.
And Mr.
Okay.
McMinn, that aligns
I'm
with,
sorry, March 29th.
is that cutting it too close? Where are we, Mr. McMinn, as you look at it?
Well, I guess our hope would be that we start to get this feedback over the course of the next 30 days, and that we'll have a pretty good idea of what the ATSC is going to come back to you with, let's say in February sometime. And we can spend some time writing the grant up as if we have a route that is preferred, even though it's not official yet. I mean, we can overlap some of this. So I think if we get there in March, we'll be all right.
And then your outreach to the Safeway area to see if there's some enthusiasm for that idea. That's something you'll be sort of parallel tracking.
Yes, we've paid BKF to do the study. We'll be reaching out, but we're going to do it in conjunction with Mark and his staff. We're not going to do this independent of you guys. We want you guys involved, so you hear the same things that we hear as well.
Okay, very good. I'm seeing Council Member Hardy.
Thank you. Ms. Garcia, could you bring up on your screen, please, the bicycle network figure from the general plan? I believe that's on page 5-25.
If it's all right, Cami, I have that up on my screen and I can share it if you'd like.
Yes, thank you.
I'll try my best to zoom in.
Thank you. Well, it's hard to confirm this without zooming in a bit on the share screen, but one thing I noticed earlier this afternoon is that with the exception of the proposed vine train routing that's actually parallel to the tracks, all of the city streets that are on the various alternate paths that we've seen tonight, all of them are already designated as part of the bicycle network. And so I was looking at that and then looking at the classification and definitions that are part of the general plan. And I'm pretty sure that in effect, no matter which of the proposed routes we select, we're not adding a new location in terms of city streets to the bicycle network we've already approved as part of the general plan, but rather what we would be doing is upgrading the classification or level of improvement to that part of the network. And that thought reminded me of the time when I was young enough to either believe or act as if I believed I was invulnerable. I spent 2 years living in San Francisco in which I never set one foot in a car, and I relied on bicycles for my daily transportation, commuted to work, and entirely on the city streets. I took the middle of the lane whenever I could, and if I could 30 miles an hour and hit all the lights, I would do that too. That's how young and foolish I was. That bought me one trip to the emergency room, 2 rather lovely hand-built English frames ruined, and another bicycle damaged but repairable. So it's not so much a part of my life now, but there was a time when bicycling was everything for me transportation-wise. And at my presently more advanced age, having been stripped of that illusion of invulnerability by time, I find that I'm reluctant to bicycle in places that seem hazardous to me. So I also want to say at the same time, from my experiences driving in urban areas where some of these higher classification bicycle paths and lanes are in place, it does take some adjustment. And I'm pretty sure that what happens, in fact, is that people do adapt and become accustomed to paying attention to those things one needs to pay attention to at intersections and other places where the cars and bicycles potentially come into contact. So, but again, I thought it might be helpful for everyone, public and council, to see and recognize that we're not talking about putting bicycles any place on the city streets where we haven't already decided bicycles should be. Thank you.
Thank you for the comments. Are there any other council comments before I open public comments? I am seeing none, so we'll go now to public comments. I'll look to our city clerk.
We do have public comment. First name Carlota, I'm going to allow you to speak. You should be able to unmute yourself and address the council.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Hi, this is Carlota Sinato, Program Manager with the Napa County Bicycle Coalition. Thank you to Mr. Schaefer and to Chuck for the presentation and for updating everybody. We've been involved in this conversation as much as possible since 2019 throughout its various phases, and really appreciate all the responsiveness that we've seen from the city and from the Vine Trail team on community feedback and adjusting after seeing the potential impact it could have having this trail more directly in town. We originally expressed support for Oak Avenue pretty strongly because of its close vicinity to the elementary school and other schools. But we do want to respect the community concern and feedback. And I think Chuck put it very well that really any of these three alignments would be a great improvement. And it would be a really great asset to have in St. Helena. So any of these alignments, we'd be happy to see move forward. I think it was also important, I think Councilmember Hardy touched on this as well, that the Vine Trail would really help benefit riders of all ages and abilities, of all comfort levels, and help get folks on bikes who are in that interested but concerned audience. And that would really help reach city goals around active transportation and public health. And we would really encourage the city and city council to make that alignment decision as quickly as you're able. I know that there's more outreach to be done, and I know that there's more discussion to be had. We'd really love to see St. Helena be part of the active transportation program grant application. That would really make the application more competitive and also would help St. Helena secure much needed funds to get this trail in the ground for people to use. So we appreciate the work and dedication that everyone's putting towards this. The Vine Trail is an incredibly important part of our active transportation network. So we look forward to seeing this process move forward. Thank you.
Thank you for the comments. and I'll look to our city clerk to see if there's additional public comment.
Yes, we do have additional public comment. First name, Jacqueline, I'm going to allow you to speak. You should be able to unmute yourself and address the council.
Yes, hi, thank you, council. Dr. Hilgeroth, I'm a resident and owner on Church Street, and up to this moment, myself and our neighbors have not been addressed about this topic. So happy to hear that you're going to be opening up some focused groups so that we can voice what I've learned from my neighbors. There's 4, and I think 3 of them are on the call today. We're concerned about safety. Church Street sees people flying beyond 60 miles an hour on a very small street where there's elderly and children who live there. And so our concern is around safety primarily. And if there's mitigation to assure that we can get that speed limit down to what it should be. I've actually had to nail 25-hour mile of zones myself on the street. And you can see me waving stop signs trying to slow people down. Beyond that, we're happy to hear that that parking will remain, because some of the residents on Church Street, like myself, I do not have any parking space on my lot. So I rely on having to park in the street, as well as the community over at the Lewis Park. That's widely used by Uber drivers and people for lunches and people just on their way between cities to have lunch and go to the restroom. So I think there's a high need for parking. So we're happy to hear that it's going to remain, but our concern is safety. So we appreciate your consideration.
Thank you. Thank you for the public comment. And as we wrap this item up in a bit, we'll talk more about the outreach. And so I'll look to our city clerk to see what additional public comments.
First name, Richard, I'm going to allow you to speak. You should be able to unmute yourself and address the council.
Yes. So I am a bike rider occasionally. But beside that, I think there's a problem with Church Street in the access to Church Street off of Pope, which is a very well-traveled street. And I'm concerned about the bicyclist turning onto Church off of Pope. I think that's a real problem. I don't know how you can address that. And I do think Church in general, being a narrow street, and as the last caller emphasized, the speed limit, the speed there, and so forth. So, the other one I have is Oak, and I think it's been addressed in terms of the parking issue. I think that's a critical issue for people who are going to the schools or the churches, or just also going to Main Street. The people that park on Oak, that's their alternative to parking on Main Street. So, from my perspective, I think as a bicyclist, if you were coming north to St. Helena, I think an alternative would be to go on either Grayson or on Sulphur Springs Road and go over to Crane, which Sulphur Springs needs paving badly. But just in general, I think as a route, taking Sulphur Springs to Crane over to Spring over to Allen, which is a wide street, and then working your way over to Madrona would be a very acceptable route for bicyclists. I know that it's not getting directly into downtown St. Helena, but I don't think bicyclists, I don't think that's the main part of what they're doing. I mean, there may be some commercial activity from the bicyclists in doing that, but primarily I think it's mainly to get to a point where you can either keep going north toward Calistoga or parking your bike somewhere in St. Helena and going into the downtown, whether you're a block away or right there. I mean, for instance, if you were coming west to east on Spring Street, you could really do that street pretty safely as it is. And I do that all the time as a bicyclist. But, I think that's to me a more preferable alternative to either Oak or Church Street. And I forget what the other alternative was, but those to me would be a pretty easy alternative to go that other route, Crane to Spring to Allen and so forth.
Okay. Thank you for the comment. And again, our outreach, we'll circle back on that as we complete this item so folks know how to put their input in. And I will look to our city clerk. We have, I believe, a little bit more public comment.
Yes. First name Annette, I'm going to allow you to speak. You should be able to unmute yourself and address the council.
I think I did it. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. This is Annette Smith. This is my third Zoom meeting regarding the Vine Trail. So, going back, Chuck, we were never notified as landlords on Oak that this was happening. And our tenants called us because John had gone in and spoken with them. And they called us because they were so concerned that if parking was taken away on Oak, they would probably be closing their doors soon because they rely on that parking for their business. And so to lose the 40, 50 parking spots along Oak and Adams, to me, would just be forcing people out of business. And even people who don't have a business on Oak and Adams, but because it's a place you park to walk into town and do your business. And so I've expressed my opinions many times to many different entities. And I've also written a letter that I won't repeat the points in that, but it is, I think I addressed it to public comment so that you all have it there somewhere to read. And I would hope you would read that and at least think about it. One of the things that I was going to say was that the difference with St. Helena is we're a bubbling little tight community with very little parking, whereas from Yountville to Napa, I mean, that bike trail doesn't go into the town of Yountville. It's on the outer skirts and then juts over to towards the vet's home and down to Napa. So I don't know what went on to get the right of ways with all of that, but it seemed to me that that particular trail does not impact any businesses, nor did it eliminate any parking because people have been riding that route for a long time. In fact, when I was in high school, I went to Justin, Siena, and we rode our bikes from St. Helena to Justin, Siena, along that frontage road with no problem at all. So people have been buzzing down that corridor for a very long time, but it's different in St. Helena. And so I'm hoping that you will stay away from Oak and Adams to allow the community to continue to use that parking there. And I don't want to speak for the people on Church, but the one thing I thought about that route when it was proposed was that there's already, you have all those classifications, but I'll say a bicycle lane, a path from Napa Valley College that comes along the north side of Pope from pretty much the college and the Mobile Home Park. And I know that it comes down and then I think there's a portion where you share the road and go over the little bridge, but then there's signs there that say bike lane or bike route. So it's already there from the college, which would tie into going over Pope and to Church if the kids want to ride out to the college there. It is there. It's just, it feels like, the Vine Trail is not a bad thing. It's a good thing. My kids drive to Yountville, take the trail and ride into Napa. They love it. But if it's going to seriously impair the lives of the people or the community of St. Helena by eliminating parking, and I would suggest that perhaps you look at an even different route. I never thought of the one that was just suggested. But I do know that because we weren't notified, but our tenants told us, I did go ahead and call John Sales and set up a meeting with him because, I didn't know what was going on. And at that point in time, this is several months ago, he did show me like 7 or 8 plans. And my goodness, one was, we were losing 97 parking spots at that one. So they were going to toss that. But we're down to the 40 or 50.
If I can interrupt, Ms. Smith, we're at the 4 minutes, but thank you for putting your comments in today. And then if you can continue with those comments through our outreach over the next into March, that would be excellent. Thank you. So I'll look to our city clerk and see if there's any additional public comment.
Yes. First name, Alan.
Yes, Alan Galbraith. I live on Allen Avenue. For sure, I would welcome a bike path that passed through Allen Avenue. I'm a bicyclist myself. I've used the Vine Trail many times. I've been a significant financial supporter of it. But in thinking about it, my own personal view is that if the Vine Trail can get through St. Helena on the east side without crossing Highway 29, that is by far a most preferable solution. And of course, if it goes down Church Street and Church Street has to be turned one way and there are safety concerns, my hope is that we have the engineering talent to satisfy those concerns. But again, I would absolutely welcome all bicyclists to come down Allen Avenue. They look at my house, they enjoy it, and I enjoy talking with them. And that's just the way I feel about it. So thank you for allowing me to comment. Bye-bye.
Thank you for the comments. Okay, I'll look to our city clerk to see if there's additional public comments.
There is no additional comment.
Okay, thank you. So I'll bring it back to the council now and our city manager and see where we are. Are there any, I'm seeing our clerk.
Excuse me, we do have one more comment. First name Ronald, I'm going to allow you to speak. You should be able to unmute yourself and address the council.
After a Zoom meeting with the Transportation and Sustainability Committee, I did send my comments and copied the console. And after the last Zoom meeting with the chamber, I also sent my comments, so I'm not going to repeat those. On Church, that's a pretty small street there, if I remember. I haven't lived in St. Helena for several years, but just for a second, I'd like to read you the itinerary of back roads. It's a 5 or 6 day trip. The first day it starts in Napa and they stay at the Auberge. They drive up the trail and stay the second night at Solage and Calistoga with a detour through Pope Valley. Their next day, they leave from Calistoga and go over to Bodega Bay. And from Bodega Bay, they go up the coast. They stay over there at the Bodega Lodge. And the next day, they go up the coast through Russian River into Hillsburg, where they spend the next 2 days, and they explore Alexander Valley and Dry Creek. Now, none of those pathways, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with them, have a designated right-of-way. So I would think that somewhere between all the engineers and everything, even if the bicyclists had to share the road for one block with Church Street, if that was the selected route, I mean, you're going through St. Helena, you need pathway through St. Helena. Somewhere along the line, I think bicyclists could adapt for one single block. It's obvious that none of this tour going from Angwin to Pope Valley back, going to Calistoga to Santa Rosa. It's on a pretty narrow road, exploring Alexander Valley. I drive that road fairly frequently between Hillsburg and Calistoga. And on one side we got hillside, on one side we got river. Not a lot of pathway for bicyclists, yet they go on a daily. Like I said before in my letter, I live in Hillsburg. We share the road over here with bicyclists every day going down Hillsburg Avenue, which has as much traffic as Main Street. So if Church is the alternative, I would think that somewhere between engineers, and even if you had to put up a sign to bicyclists to share the road for one blockway, I don't think that's a lot to ask. I also would like to address the chamber and to the council. I don't know if there's any chamber members on, but I would like to think that something could be done with something with the Vine Train in coordination to have amenities set up so that, and I suggested Lyman Park, where people could park their bikes and then go into town. Because if we're not going to utilize, I think Chuck said an extra 200 bicyclists a day, and if we're not going to utilize and give them an opportunity to go into town, then we're just a pathway to get from point A to point B. And I don't see that being a big advantage to the residents of St. Helena. But the rest of my comments, you've already read them. So thank you.
Actually, maybe I'll just clarify one point. Ron is right. There are 200 tourists who would come into town. I just want to also say that for every tourist, there are 3 residents. What we found is that there are 70% of the people who use the Vine Trail are our residents. So we should, as we think about the Vine Trail, we should think about our residents using it 70% of the time. And these people who are comfortable, the fearless ones that go on bike tours, they're in the 30%. But even though 30% is 200 other additional people that spend money in St. Helena.
Very good. Thank you for the clarification. I'll go back to the council, see if there's any additional council comment at this point. I'm seeing none. I'm seeing Councilmember Chateau.
Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you to Chuck and to the Vine Trail. I do see this as something that's going to be so beneficial for St. Helena for living here and being able to get on that trail. And for friends who are coming to visit, and if they do happen to stay in the hotel, my friends stay with us when it's not COVID times, but they do want to get out and they want to be running and getting on the trails where it's safe, and even just taking walks and enjoying this beautiful landscape. So I see it as such an asset. I'm comfortable with these 3 options, just knowing that when we open it up, that's going to cost us thousands and thousands, if not $100,000 to continue studying. And we made these choices. And I think that we can find one in here that we can work on enough to get into the grant and work through all of the neighbor issues, and obviously work with the engineer and make sure that we come up with real solutions that can help them. I too am concerned about that turn off of Pope Street. That was one of the reasons why at first I wasn't thinking about churches deeply, but now that I've thought about it, I'm just hoping that the engineers will come up with some great solutions so that we can make it safe to turn there. So thank you. I'm comfortable with the direction, with the studies that we have, and going out to neighbors and people and businesses and talking to them and getting their input and coming back with a decision so that we can have it for you for writing that grant.
Very good. Thank you. I'm seeing Councilmember Hall.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for your work on this. It's been, there's quite a lot of work, and looks like quite a bit still to go. I was taken by the comments from Mr. Galbraith, Mr. Corsetti, and Ms. Smith. I've thought personally myself, it would be nice to see this trail further out over on the east side. I think our general plan calls for something out there. As Ms. Smith indicated, there's already existing bike routes out by Napa Valley College, which of course is soon to be our new city hall and police station. It's also right next to Wapo Park, and it's also sitting right on a city right-of-way that extends south all the way to the redwood forest. So I think somewhere in there, without too much work and too much study, we could connect the tree tunnel through the library, through Hunter, down Star, and literally all the way down to the redwood forest, if you wanted, almost entirely on city property. You would connect with Mills Lane, of course, which we're in the process of redesigning right now, and that will be realigned with Grayson. So our kids could safely commute via this route straight across a signalized intersection on 29 straight to school. So it's just another option. We do have indicators in our general plan that the thinking was looking towards the east side. I am concerned about the impact this is going to have on our merchants and our landlords in our downtown commercial core. I agree with Mr. Corsetti's comments that most folks on bikes, I think, are I wouldn't say that they're necessarily trying to get from point A to B. Sometimes they are, but I don't think their priority on a bicycle is to go shopping in downtown St. Helena. So I view that as a secondary item. I'm very concerned about the impact this has on parking, certainly on Oak, on Adams. Parking is a huge premium in this town, and I would prefer that this body spend its time thinking about solving our parking downtown. And let's get a parking structure in place first before we bind our town with another route. We already have a rail line and we have a state highway. And we're a very small town with very little room as is. So I would like to think a little bit more about the routes. I would like to see a study done on something out on the east side. It sounds like we have perhaps a month or so to get a study done. And if it's not super complex out there, and I don't think it needs to be, we maybe have time to do that. So those are my general comments and feedback. I would also say, like Lester, I spent a lot of years on bicycles. My prior residence down in the East Bay in Alamo was right on the Iron Horse Trail, where I raised my two sons, and we spent almost every single weekend running up and down the Iron Horse Trail. So I'm a fan of these routes. I was not taking the Iron Horse Trail into downtown Walnut Creek to go shopping. That was never the intent. But I love these, and the more we can think about active transportation and also think about the unique constraints in our community that are different from Calistoga and different from Yountville, I think we might be able to find a route that fits our needs and also takes advantage of our new redwood forest, which, by the way, gives us a direct route from the forest to the schools. That would be pretty cool. So I'd like to just take some time and look at that option as well. That's my feedback. Thank you very much. And thank you for all the work on this so far.
Thank you for the comments. And I'm seeing Councilmember Hardy.
Thank you. I certainly hope Councilmember Hall's experiences did not involve as many broken bicycles as mine, but I want to say I'm not categorically opposed to looking at another routing option, but I am looking at the request for direction that's at the end of the staff report, and just reading that, it does seem to me that if we're going to ask for analysis of an alternative route, we need to be as clear about what that route would be as we can. I also want to say that, and I'll just read this out loud. It says, if additional corridor or corridors are desired for study, does the council prefer to determine the additional corridor or corridors via council workshop, ad hoc committee, or other alternative? That looks like a kind of multi-step process to me. If I understand Council Member Hall correctly, I may be overreaching here, but it sounded to me as though he was hoping there could be some analysis done that could fit into the stakeholder outreach process. I see a nodding head, so I'm not too far off track here. Thank you. So that I'm fine with. If we can do some additional analysis congruent with Councilmember Hall's interest in exploring a more eastern route in a way that keeps us on track with respect to the outreach process, then that's good as far as I'm concerned. But I'm concerned that if we don't have that well defined at the outset, meaning this evening, that that the additional analysis will cause a significant delay. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Councilmember Hall, and then I'm going to check in with Mr. McMinn regarding this. So I'll go to Councilmember Hall first.
Thank you. And thank you, Councilmember Hardy. I agree with your comments wholeheartedly. I want to make sure that we hit our grant deadline. And so I'm not sure we need an ad hoc committee or separate additional workshop. I'm not sure that we have time necessarily. Maybe we do. I guess it's more of a question for Mr. Schaefer, but if not, I think it's probably a quick review of what's already on the ground. Sort of this route I was referring to is it's halfway there right now. And Mills Lane is something that we're in the process of redesigning anyway. So, and frankly, if you wanted to go south of Mills to the Redwood Forest on just a spur, you can do that on a city-owned right-of-way that's been there since 1954. So anyway, it's just an interesting option. I think, frankly, I might be able to spend some time with Mr. Schaefer, Mr. McMinn, and we could look at it fairly quickly and fold it into part of the outreach if needed.
Thank you. I'm going to touch base with Mr. McMinn here and get his thoughts. If he thinks that this is a viable aspect to look at, I'll just say that I really concur that it's well worth taking a look. I think Councilmember Hall framed it very well. I do think that it's, as he said, it's another route through town. We're a small town. So getting the focus on making sure we get things right is critical. And we have a time frame now that we know, and we believe we can hit it. So I'll just touch base with Mr. McMinn and get his thoughts on that.
Sure. So happy. I guess I'm a little unsure what actually the route is. So the point that we have to get back to is Main Street at Pratt Avenue. That's where the trail is going to be built going forward. You know, the bids are out. The contractor will be selected here in a month or so. So from Pratt Avenue at Main Street, Councilman Hall, what is the route you're suggesting we look at?
So let's see, I'm going to have a hard time.
If I can just jump in here for a moment, and I'll ask for the council thoughts on this, but in terms of sort of the specifics of this, perhaps an offline conversation, if we sort of agree on a general focus, just so that, we have a timing issue this evening. What are the thoughts of the council?
I would like to hear Mr. McMinn's thoughts.
Okay. Yeah. So Mr. Hall, if you want to lay it out a little bit.
Okay. So my thought was from Pratt, you would run down the wine train track, as I think you have indicated. You'd come down to basically Library Lane. You'd run this right in front of the library, and you go east on Adams up to the Hunter subdivision, which the city is reviewing right now, through there to Star, which is already set up, I believe, with bike lanes on both sides of it, and to Pope, from Pope up to College. And College, I believe, has a 12-foot right-of-way right now that is designated bike lane. All the way down south from, College will be the new city hall. The Montessori school is there. Wapo Park is there. You can go all the way down to the end of College. And then there's just a small gap there. One easement that we might need to deal with, and I can send it over to you, Chuck, that would get us down to Mills. And the city is working on Mills right now. We're thinking about redoing the way that ties into the Grayson crossing at 29. And it is one of the only signalized places where we can get from, the west side of 29, add a signal across to the east side of town, and then around town this route. I was just thinking through that and thought another interesting piece of this might be at Mills, where you come down from College. You can also, if you wanted, you could run south down to the city's new redwood forest, and it would be a way to tie the redwood forest into the rest of the city network, and certainly the bike network in our schools very quickly and easily on a city-owned right-of-way. And that would just be a spur that runs down there. That's it. Otherwise, the route would run right basically up College, up Star, and reconnect just as you've got it indicated there. Adams to Library to the wine train track.
Right. Okay, so I guess a couple thoughts. One is 70% of the users are going to be our locals and 30% are tourists. And what you're describing is really kind of a bypass of St. Helena. And that would be good, maybe good for the 30%, although some of those 30% do want to buy things in St. Helena. And the other is that it's going to be much more expensive to build because you're probably adding 2 or 3 miles to the route by going all the way out to Silverado Trail and then all the way back again. And I guess I would say that the path of least resistance is not going to be to use that. The people, once they understand, they're going all the way out to the Silverado Trail and then all the way back in again to avoid 3 or 4 blocks in town, they're not going to take it. It'll be a waste of money. And I don't think it'll be necessarily very well scoring in the grant department as well, because you're taking it away from the schools and away from the churches and away from downtown. And so you don't get any points in the ATP grant application. But we're not averse to looking at it. We'd be happy if you want us to look at it. My feedback is I don't think it's going to be. It's not going to be a winner route.
I appreciate your thoughts. I think it's a nice way actually to link our schools and to the majority of our population, which is right between those 2 schools. And most of the route exists today, I believe so. So I don't know exactly, and I'm sure that there's quite a bit of linear foot or linear miles that obviously BKF will need to take a look at, but I definitely think it's worth looking at. I'm very concerned about the impact that the other options that we're settling in on right now are going to have in our downtown commercial core, and that's a primary concern. The other concern, of course, is to consider the schools, both Montessori as well as the rest of the high school and the grade school up on Grayson. And again, if the city wants to perhaps on its own link this to the Redwood Forest, then there's certainly an option to do it.
So I certainly support the idea of looking at this. I think it's an excellent idea. And I look at Chuck and I recognize what you're saying about wanting to, bring people into the downtown. I'm not sure if there's a way to look at an initial downtown approach that also looks at as funding perhaps comes available, opens up this secondary route that I think would be really of tremendous benefit to the community. I'm seeing Councilmember Chateau.
Thank you. Just because I know we need to move on, so I wanted to ask really quickly of our city manager, do we have, I know this is new work, so is there the capacity to add looking at this other alternative in the time that we need? And also, what's the projected cost?
Thanks for that question. It's a question that we do need to ask Mr. Schaefer tonight. In terms of outreach, I think when I look at a calendar, internally, the staff would probably want to be conducting the outreach in the week of February 7th and the week of February 14th. And having enough time after that week to prepare information for a meeting, I believe, on March 2nd. And so we would have a couple of weeks between today and maybe the end of the month for Mr. Schaefer. But if that timeline doesn't work for you, then, it would be helpful to clarify if your cost estimate needs to be adjusted based on what you heard. But we would need information on this alternate route by about the 28th of January, I think, to have things ready.
Is Mr. Schaefer still on with us?
Yes. I am. And the answer is we could have it in time. Now cost is, I need to go back and look and see how much, because what we do is we walk every single one of these streets and every single corridor to make sure that we understand what the parameters are. I think that to us is most critical to do we do a photo montage and lay out and try to visualize, well, what would it look? What is the space requirements? And what other items are there, just to determine that. But I think it could be done in time.
And when could you give us an estimate in terms of cost?
Well, right now, what we've done with cost is we've done a comparative cost, because cost has some to do with the right-of-way acquisition. So right now we've assumed zero right-of-way acquisition on these alignments. So it's really been a comparative, are we striping or are we actually doing physical improvements? And what we've tried to do with the downtown routes is to utilize existing roadways to minimize the construction.
Well, I'm thinking the cost of your study, not the actual cost of implementation.
I have that tomorrow, right? So that's,
okay.
I just need to take a look at what I given Mark last week, and I wasn't thinking it was this long. I was thinking it was more towards into town. So I just got to figure out how long it will take us to physically walk it based on the length. And if that's a day or 2 days, most of these have taken us a day to walk each alignment, right? So this one looks like it's probably a 2-day. So tomorrow I can have a number for him.
Okay, and so I'll look to the city manager. I believe there's consensus to look at this. Somebody can say if there's an objection. And I'll look to our city manager in terms of process. Can we give you a recommendation at this point that's clear about forward steps?
I think what we're interested in, and with your permission, we would probably, I think, Mr. Schaefer, we would need an amendment to your contract, which and I'm seeing our admin services director nod, we can bring that back to the council. We would need to get started sooner than our next meeting on January 25th. So that would be a necessary council action would be to approve a contract that would begin working earlier than the 25th. And I'm guessing that number may be closer to 15,000, because I think Mr. Schaefer's estimate for one day was 7,500, and we landed on 10,000 just to provide some contingency. But in terms of tonight, we're interested in receiving any feedback you have on our conceptual stakeholder outreach. I haven't heard any concerns about the plans, and I think if that works for everyone, the no specific comments related to that lets me know that I think you're comfortable, and you've provided us feedback on the 3 corridors along with this extra corridor, and we want to capture any other additional information that you want to share with us before we get started on the next steps here.
Very good. I'm seeing Vice Mayor Doring.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Hall, for making that pitch for this study. I think more studies are better for the community. I want to make sure that the outreach is aligned with the options so that folks have the ability to comment. And so there's going to be an issue here. We're going to at least have to have something to give to the public with respect to this alternative plan that we're studying, so that folks can weigh in on that. We may not have enough information at the outset, but we can have it as a proposed draft, kind of whatever we want to label it, so that we want to make sure that our folks in the community have the ability to see all of the options on the table. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. So keep that in mind, Mr. City Manager, when we're going through the outreach. I also think it's important to say this. sometimes St. Helena gets a bad rap. Oh, St. Helena. And I know, there's going to be people in the business community up and down the valley. Oh, St. Helena, we're trying to stop progress. I really think it's important for our community to have a sense of self-determination. We have unique challenges, as Mr. Hall has articulated, going through our community. And so it is good for us to try to figure out what works for our community, because that brings success if everybody's happy with it, right? And so I would hope that folks who are going to be attending these workshops and doing the outreach come with an open heart and are community first. And that sometimes requires shared sacrifice. And so, I hear a lot of folks saying, I'd rather not have it here. Well, bring an option to the table, as Mr. Hall has done. Focus on solutions, not just problems. So those are the things in general. I know we can do this. I am very excited about this, Mr. McMahon. I want to take a moment to thank you and your team for the years of service. I know this is probably a little frustrating for you, but I think we're going to get a plan that works for our entire Napa Valley that's going to be well beyond our time. And so thank you for that. And I think our community can come together on this if we're a little bit more positive and not so such a downer sometimes. This is an opportunity for us to come together and celebrate this and we may not achieve all of our goals, but we can achieve some of them. And so I'm optimistic that we can do that. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you for those comments. I echo that and want to thank Mr. McMinn as well for the sort of the determination to keep pushing forward. And as the Vice Mayor said, we've got some unique challenges in St. Helena, but I think there's a welcomeness to the Vine Trail. I think there really is. And it's just dialing in the right route. I think we're there in terms of the will and the excitedness really from the community about opening the door to this. So just wanting you to know that there's a positivity to this process, and we'll get it dialed in here soon. So, Mr. Prestwich, do you have what you need at this point?
I do. Thank you.
Okay, very good. And so thank you all for the participation in this conversation. Is there any last comment that I'm missing here? Not seeing any. Oh, Mr. McMahon, do you have any?
No, I was just going to say, I am optimistic we're going to get there. This is a process. We will get to a route, and thank you all for taking the time to seriously dig in on this. I'm not discouraged. I am encouraged. We're making progress.
Great. Well, thanks for being here.
Yep. Take it easy.
Okay. With that, we'll move on to, I want to ask first, do we need to take a short break, or are we good powering through trying to get to 9? Any council input?
I'm good.
I'd prefer a break.
Okay, 5. We're looking at 5 minutes, so it's 8. We'll come back at 8:08. We'll see you then. Okay, we're getting folks back on. It's 8:08. We've got a few more folks to roll on here. And we'll get back to. I'm seeing our city manager. I'm seeing our council starting to come back. I'm seeing our city attorney, our city clerk. And we'll just give it and here we go. I think we've got our full council back. So with that, we'll continue the meeting. We'll move into item 12.1 under new business. This is the first reading and intention to adopt an ordinance amending the St. Helena Municipal Code, Chapter 5.40, permits for elder and or dependent adult caregivers to transfer responsibility for managing the registration and background check process of individual caregivers from the county, except in special circumstances, to the California Department of Social Services, CDSS, via their home care aid registry. And this is prepared by our Chief of Police, Chris Hartley.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. The purpose of the proposed ordinance is to amend portions of Chapter 5.40 of the St. Helena Municipal Code, which is an ordinance which is required by state law, to delete the requirement that caregivers obtain a locally issued permit and adding a mandate that all Napa County caregivers register through the California Department of Social Services Home Care Aid Registry. This change will transfer the responsibility for background checks and permit issuance from Napa County to the California Department of Social Services, except in limited situations when a care recipient chooses to hire a caregiver denied registration through the California Department of Social Services due to reasons set forth in the Health and Safety Code. So basically what this does is it takes the burden away from the city and the county to maintain a registry for investigative purposes. We can go straight to a state website which lists all the names of those that have been approved by the state to caregive for our adult dependent and elderly community members.
Thank you. So a question that I would ask, so it means that locally we are not maintaining those records, but they are maintained at the state level, so they are still accessible.
That is correct.
Okay. And I'm also seeing Ms. Blakely on from Napa County. I'm assuming you're on for this item. Is there anything to add?
Nothing to add.
Okay, thank you. Is there council comment at this point? I'm looking and seeing no council comments, so I'll look to our city clerk to see if there is public comment.
There is no public comment.
Okay, very good. I'll bring it back then to the council. And I'm wondering if let's see, I'm not seeing any hands. So the recommended action, I'm just rolling up on the staff report.
It's to approve the first reading by title only and waive further reading.
Okay, and I'm seeing Councilmember Chateau.
I'd be happy to make the approval. I'm so grateful for this. It's going to mean that our seniors are safer. So I'd love to make a motion to approve the first reading by title only and waive further reading.
Second.
And a roll call, please.
Councilmember Chateau?
Yes.
Councilmember Hardy?
Yes.
Councilmember Hall?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Doring?
Yes.
And Mayor Ellsworth?
Yes. Thank you very much. Thanks for preparing this and bringing it forward, and it is appreciated. So with that, we'll move then to our item number 12.2. This is presentation of opinion research related to consideration of a June or November 2022 revenue generating local ballot measure. And I will hand this to our city manager, Mr. Prestwich.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a really important issue for the city. And in our staff report, the background section of this staff report reviews some of the work that's happened over the last couple of years that really is a part of the progress and movement toward the conversation that we're having tonight. The city has well-documented infrastructure deficiencies that are really decades in the making, particularly on our water and wastewater and storm drain infrastructure. We're an older city. There has been essentially underinvestment for decades with a number of these assets. It's extremely expensive to address some of those repairs. And in our work plan this year, built upon the work of our SHAPE committee back in 2017 and 2018, built upon the work of our financing infrastructure task force in 2020, we have included in this year's goals a work plan task to look at various financing and revenue options. And we had a city council meeting in June that provided direction to retain an opinion research firm to assist us at looking at ways that we can develop a community-supported funding strategy to address some of these vast challenges that we have with our physical infrastructure. So today, we're going to begin with a presentation from Dave Metz. He's a principal with the firm of Fairbank, Maslin, Mullen, Metz, a very well-known and very well-respected opinion research firm that has conducted some research among our likely voters. And then we'll proceed to a council discussion about options moving forward in terms of diving into more details and options associated with a potential ballot measure for June or November of 2022. So with that, let me introduce Mr. Metz, and we'll proceed with his presentation.
All right. Thank you very much, Mayor, members of the council, and Mark for the introduction. I'm Dave Metz, partner with FM3 Research, and I'm pleased to be with you tonight to share the results of our recent survey of St. Helena voters to provide both an update of what voters view as major issues facing the community, their views of city government, and also their potential support toward a variety of finance measures that might be put before voters in 2022. Before diving into the detailed results, I will just note that overall the findings are generally positive. They show that local residents have favorable attitudes toward city government, which is both an improvement from what we saw in our last poll for the community in 2016, and also more favorable than what we're seeing in many Bay Area cities at this time. And it also shows robust support for both a potential sales tax increase to fund general city services and a bond measure to support water infrastructure. The bond measure, of course, would require a higher threshold of voter approval at 2/3 of votes cast compared to a general sales tax, which only requires simple majority approval. And that higher threshold, as we'll see, poses some potential challenges for the passage of a bond measure, whereas support for a sales tax looks very, very broad and very, very positive at this time. So with that overview, I'll go ahead and dive into some of the underlying numbers. But first, a little bit of methodology about the survey. We conducted the survey over roughly a month's time between mid-November and mid-December with a break for Thanksgiving in between. In communities as small as St. Helena, we typically have to keep the survey in the field longer than we do in other locations to give as many local voters as possible an opportunity to participate. The survey was conducted with multiple modes on landline phones, wireless phones, with invitations to an online survey delivered both by email and by text message in order to maximize the number of respondents we received. And I'm pleased to say that we got more than twice as many respondents as was the case at the time of our last survey for the city in 2016. Survey methodology has expanded somewhat since then, and we have more online options for conducting surveys. And we got nearly 400 respondents, which is frankly a sample size that we typically use in much larger cities, and I think gives us a pretty high degree of confidence in the results that we'll be sharing today. So with that, we'll go on to some contextual questions about voter views of conditions in the city. We asked people about their views of St. Helena City government overall and the St. Helena City Council. Both of these were questions that we asked in our previous survey in 2016. And as you'll see, the numbers have improved somewhat since then in terms of views of city government. 51% now approve of city government's performance, with only 41% disapproving. That's a +10 margin compared to in 2016 when 44% approved and 50% disapproved, a -6 margin. So increasingly positive attitude toward city government over the last 5 years. And I should note this is at a time when in many parts of the region, we've seen lower levels of confidence in local government. So it speaks well to the work that all of you have been doing in St. Helena. Views of the city council remain positive, essentially the same as what we saw in 2016, 50% approval and 39% disapproval. We also wanted to understand what issues are most on local voters' minds as concerns facing St. Helena. So we offered the respondents a list of these issues. You'll see them running down the left-hand side of the slide, and then ask them to rate each one as either an extremely, very, somewhat, or not too serious problem. We've ranked them here by the proportion that rated each either extremely or very serious, so the top 2 points on that scale. And what will leap off the page at you here are those top 3 issues all have to deal with water supplies. We've got outright majorities of local voters who label drought, the future of our local water supply, and water shortages as extremely serious problems facing St. Helena, and more than 3/4 rating them at least a very serious problem. No other issue tops 40%, rating it a very serious problem. And that next tier, the health of small businesses and the economy, cost of housing, roads in need of repair, frankly, those are issues that in most parts of the region right now tend to be the top issues on the list, in particular housing costs. So there is a unique and intense concern about water issues in St. Helena that we don't see in many other communities. As we move down the list, you'll see the lower level of concerns here, except for the couple items at the top of the slide. All the rest of them are below 50%, rating them very serious problems. And that includes the amount that you pay in local taxes, which only 40% view as a very serious problem. And I think when you think about the relative level of concern about those issues, not very intense concern about taxes, but a lot of concern about issues relating to infrastructure and some core services from city government, it's not surprising that you see voters willing to tax themselves, as we'll see in just a moment here. It also means that there is a broad recognition that there is a need for additional funding for the level of city services that St. Helena residents need and want. 66% see at least some need for such additional funding. Only about 1/4 indicate that there is either a little need or no real need for such additional funding. And this metric is one that we often look to as an indicator of the degree of recognition of the kinds of needs that contribute to putting a local finance measure on the ballot. The fact that you have about 2/3 of voters who do recognize some need for additional funding lines up pretty closely, as you'll see in a few minutes, with the proportion who say that they would vote yes on some potential tax increases. More specifically, we also wanted to understand whether people saw a need for additional funding to address the condition of St. Helena infrastructure. And as you'll remember, if we look at that top tier of concerns that we viewed a few minutes ago, obviously issues relating to water infrastructure were very high on the list, but also just the overall condition of local infrastructure was something that a majority of voters rated as a very serious problem. And so we do see a slightly broader share of local voters, 73%, who are telling us they perceive a need for additional funding to address the condition of infrastructure. Context for where we voters some potential ballot measure concepts. To do this, we split our overall sample of voters into 2 randomly selected halves, each one a random and representative sample of local voters. For half the sample, we started by asking them about the sales tax and then followed up by asking them about the bond measure. For the other half of the sample, we started with the bond measure and followed with the sales tax. And the goal here is to prevent any bias that might come from the order in which the 2 measures were presented, and understand how voters might view one in the context of the other. To round that out, we had a follow-up question after all voters had heard descriptions of both measures, asking them how they would vote if they knew that both measures might be on the same ballot together. So here are the results that we saw when we asked voters about the sales tax measure. We had a total of 72% who indicated they would vote yes. We read the respondents. The description you'll see at the top of the slide, which is intended to model the 75-word ballot question that voters would actually read on election day on their ballots. That's the one piece of information that every voter will have before they vote, whether they read the newspaper, whether they look at the voter pamphlet, whether they go to the city's website, they'll all see the ballot. And so reactions to this language are the most effective way of assessing public support for a local ballot measure. And obviously for a measure that needs simple majority approval, to start with 72% support puts it in a very, very strong place. Almost half of voters, 43%, indicate that they would definitely vote yes. And there wasn't really a big difference in the overall level of support if the measure was presented first or presented second relative to the bond measure. Secondly, when we presented the bond measure, and you'll see the language that we used to model that ballot question at the top of the slide, the overall level of support we saw from voters was pretty similar, 70% in favor, 25% opposed. Again, not a very big difference if it was presented before the sales tax or after the sales tax. Here, though, because a bond measure would require the approval of 2/3 of local voters, the level of support is within the margin of error of that threshold for approval. So while this is an encouraging level of support, there's obviously much less cushion there and more risk in getting support for a measure that requires a 2/3 vote. Now, we also wanted to understand the degree to which the amount of the bond measure might impact voters' willingness to support it. And so we tested a lower bond amount of $36 million per year. And as you'll see, support was roughly the same, 70% indicating they would vote yes, with a slightly larger share indicating that they would definitely vote yes. What this seems to suggest is that voter support for the bond measure is not so much contingent on the size of the bond, it's much more about its substance and whether or not they think it's a good idea. So there doesn't seem to be much advantage to shrinking the size of the bond in terms of the level of voter support that the city is likely to receive. Now, once voters had heard both ballot measure concepts in whichever order, we then had a follow-up question where we asked the respondents to tell us if they knew that both measures were to appear on the ballot at the same time, whether they thought they would vote for both measures, only one measure, or for neither measure. And as you'll see here, if we total up the percentages that tell us they would either vote yes on both or on one measure or the other, support for both of them drops somewhat substantially into the mid-50s, with a larger number of voters who initially may have voted for both measures now saying to themselves, well, wait a minute, I'd only vote for one if they were on the ballot together. Now, I should note that this question perhaps prompts people to think a little bit more in that choice framework than might actually be the case when the measures appear side by side on the ballot. Certainly voters in St. Helena, as in most California communities, are used to seeing multiple finance measures on the same ballot, whether it's at the city level or the county level or the school district or the state. And the record generally is that voters are willing to vote for multiple finance measures at the same time if they're confident that there's been a good case made for both measures. But it does indicate that at least some dynamic of having the two measures together may reduce support. And obviously with support for the bond measure starting out in a very close margin, that is something that I think has to be considered when you think about which ballots these measures might be placed on if you choose to move forward. Finally, at the end of the poll, we did test one other finance concept, the notion of increasing the transient occupancy tax by 2%. We tested this at the end of the poll because it would raise significantly less money than the other options, and we didn't want to color voters' evaluations of the sort of more central measures with the possibility of this additional measure being on the ballot. Also, typically, transient occupancy taxes tend to receive the highest level of support from local voters by definition. It's not a tax on the local resident, it's a tax on visitors for the most part. And you'll see here, it is the case that voters do support it broadly, 80% in favor and 14% opposed. But we did not explore this concept at the same level of detail in this survey as we did the sales tax or the bond measure. So that's where we start in terms of perceptions of the two central measures. We then had some follow-up questions where first we unpacked the ways that money from the measures might be used and offered the respondents a list of potential uses of the money and had them rate the importance they would assign to each one. Again, on a 4-point scale, this time is extremely, very, somewhat, or not too important. And once again, we've ranked them by the proportion that rated each in the top 2 categories on that scale. The spending categories, there were a lot of things we tested. We took things that bond money might be spent on and things that a sales tax might be used to invest in, mixed them together just for the sake of efficiency in the survey, and had voters rate all these potential projects. They're broken into 5 tiers here, and I'll move through them fairly quickly because there's some pretty clear distinctions in terms of what falls in one tier versus another. All the top tier investments, as you'll see here, have to do with water. Not surprisingly, given the concern that voters have with that. At least 80% rate each of these potential investments as a very important use of funds that could be generated from these measures. When we get to the second tier, you'll see a bunch of other items that relate to water, but then as we move toward the bottom of the slide, ensuring that all funds are used only in St. Helena, supporting local businesses, and improving the city's long-term financial stability. Essentially investing in the city's economic health and well-being also rates as a high priority for about 3/4 of voters, coming in just under some of those purposes related to water quality and water infrastructure. As we move down to the next tier, some of the things that are in this sort of third group include more public safety related investments, things like police and fire department response times, EMS, police and fire response services, and maintaining public safety more broadly. In addition, sewage and storm drain infrastructure and dams also rate in this middle category, with roughly 2/3 of voters rating each of these investments as being extremely or very important. And when you look at the total that are rating each of these investments as very important, you can sort of line those figures up with the threshold that each ballot measure would require. So items that at least 2/3 are rating as very important seem like something that may add some urgency to that bond measure, where we know it needs 2/3 vote to pass. As we move to the fourth tier, you'll see we drop below 2/3, rating these items as very important. We still have majorities who indicate that sentiment. There's a range of other public safety items that are mentioned here, typically those that involve fire response that voters rate as very important. And in the middle of the slide, you'll see the sort of broad notion of protecting and maintaining vital city services, ranked as very important by 60% of those polled. And then finally, we have our lowest tier of service priorities. I should note that even in this low tier, these are not items that voters dismiss out of hand as being unimportant. If you look at the orange bars on the right-hand side, that's the proportion that rate these items as not too important. And even at the bottom of the list, it is fewer than 1 voter in 5 that are putting any of these investments in that category. That said, we do have 4 items that fall below 50%, rating them very important, so just less urgency attached to them, including maintaining library services, promoting St. Helena as a destination for visitors, youth recreation programs, and the broad category of preventing budget cuts. So the final section of the survey dealt with exploring some of the things that supporters and opponents might say about these ballot measures if they were to move forward, so that we could understand the consistency of support when voters are exposed to that kind of public dialogue that happens when a measure is placed on the ballot. We tested a range of messages in favor of the measures. And again, we blended here, for the sake of simplicity, messages related to the bond measure and then some messages related to the sales tax. And we've ranked the messages here by the proportion that rated each a very convincing reason to support the measures. Not surprisingly, given all the data we've looked at so far, those items that focused most specifically on addressing the city's water needs tended to be at the top of the list. One that focused on having a fully funded, responsive firefighting capability 24 hours a day also scored relatively high, as did one about road conditions, which you remember was just below water as a concern for local voters. And then a message that deals with fiscal accountability, second from the bottom. In our era where there's a lot of cynicism about government spending, not unique to St. Helena, but just as a sort of broad public sentiment, it's important to emphasize those measures that are in place, either as a matter of course or tied to a specific ballot proposal that ensure transparency and accountability in how public dollars are spent. Here you'll see the second tier of messages we tested, and as I'll show you in a moment, many of these drew a positive response from voters, but just a lot less intense reaction than that top tier I showed you. Messages that focus on making it possible for city employees to live nearby, providing workforce housing, and maintaining local property values. Good arguments, but just not as strong as the ones that, as you'll see at the top of the list here, go to the city's water needs. When we look at these messages, and you'll see a shorthand notation for each of the messages I just showed you, followed by the proportions that rated each a very or somewhat convincing reason to vote yes. Typically, it is those messages that at least 40% rate as a very convincing reason to vote yes, as represented in the dark blue bars on the left-hand side of the slide, that are the ones that we consider to be highly effective messages in support of a ballot measure. And the top three all exceed that 40% threshold, and all of them have to do with water needs and water infrastructure. As I noted, as you move toward the bottom of the slide, the intensity of reaction to a lot of these messages drops off, but in each case, we still have a robust majority that find them at least somewhat convincing. We also tested a range of negative arguments as well, including an argument criticizing a potential water bond, saying that it would benefit water users outside of the city, while only city taxpayers would be paying to support it. And then we tested more traditional arguments against finance measures, noting that with COVID and high cost of living right now, it's a tough time to increase taxes on local residents, and also asserting that government can't be trusted to spend the money effectively. After hearing both sets of arguments, as you'll see, support for the sales tax eroded slightly, but still left us with 7 and 10, indicating that they would vote in favor. And for the bond measure, the same dynamic. Support dropped slightly, but still at 68%, was over, but within the margin of error of that 2/3 supermajority that would be required for approval. So that takes us to the end of the key findings from the survey. Overall, as I said at the outset, very strong support for potential sales tax measure, needing only simple majority approval to pass. It consistently is getting support from around 7 and 10 voters, which indicates it's in a very strong position. A water bond measure gets an equivalent level of support, but because it has a much, much higher vote threshold for approval, it is in a much more, you have to be more cautious in our evaluation of it because it is within the margin of error of that majority support level required for approval. It does, however, address what voters clearly indicate is their biggest concern, which is ensuring a reliable supply of water for the city's future. And messaging which explains that rationale as a reason for putting the bond measure forward is highly effective and important to voters. Messaging that highlights the other kinds of services that a sales tax could support, including support for public safety and for road improvements, also helps to maintain the impressively broad support that voters initially offer. So regardless, if the city decides to move forward with one or both of these measures at a future election or elections, having some degree of public education and outreach, which explains why the city is making the decision to put this set of measures before voters, will likely be very important so that voters can understand it in the context of what they themselves perceive are some of the city's biggest needs. So with that, I'll hand it back to Mark if you have any additional. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dave. And just to recap in terms of timing associated with ballot measures, both for the June as well as the November ballot. June ballot obviously is a lot closer, and because of the way the council election process works, the only measure that really is a measure that could be considered in June would be a GO bond, a general obligation bond. Both the sales tax and the hotel tax concept, those concepts are concepts that would need to be placed on the November ballot, either one or both. And the bond measure could also go on in November. But in terms of the sales tax and the hotel tax, the city would have to declare a fiscal emergency in order to place that on a June ballot. And then in addition to that, from a timing standpoint, in terms of June, the city would need to bring a first reading to the council on February 8th, followed by a second reading on February 28th. The timing for November would require decision-making by late July, probably the first week in August. So those are the timing associated with placement of measures. I want to also reiterate some comments that our Infrastructure Financing Task Force made before we jump into the discussion. But the Financing Infrastructure Task Force began their work in early 2020 and concluded with a report issued May 6th, 2020. They started before COVID began and worked through the first few months of that. And I just want to, these are two excerpts that are in the staff report, but they're so important because this was written by our community members who served on that task force. And let me read you two brief paragraphs. Number one, and these are comments from that report. Unfortunately, over the past several decades, St. Helena, like many cities and states, has accumulated a significant backlog of deferred maintenance. In addition, regulatory pressure has increased in areas like water and wastewater treatment and dam safety, which require major investment in plant and equipment to retain the certifications to operate those services. The report also includes a statement that says, the enormity of the forecasted and unforecasted future investment, the risk of running afoul of regulators if timely investments aren't made, and resistance to past rate increases makes us conclude that the enterprise businesses pose a financial risk to the city. It is quite possible that the enterprise businesses will have to borrow from the city's general fund, especially in an emergency situation involving the failure of major elements of these systems. And I reiterate that because both our sewer fund as well as our our sewer fund, which is our wastewater fund, and our water fund have recently been called upon to deliver significant, really once in a generation capital improvements. On the water fund, that was the removal of the York Creek Dam last year, a cumulative total of $9 million that from start to finish that project took to deliver. And now on December 14th, 2021, the council has awarded a contract to upgrade our wastewater treatment plant, which is also under a cease and desist order. And it's taking literally every dollar of our capital improvement budget to deliver that project. And that project is funded and awarded and will begin construction too soon. But the scale of the investments that we need on the water, the wastewater, as well as the storm drain infrastructure, which has no funding source, and the coming needs on our recycled water infrastructure that can be deployed after construction of this tertiary plant. If we're going to make any progress or any measurable progress that's a significant step forward, it's going to take a bold action of the city to seek strategies to fund additional revenue opportunities to fund these infrastructure projects. And I want to mention one more element of this, and that is that in the past 6 months, the city transitioned its fire department, which has been slowly over time calibrating from a paid per call fire department that responded from their house to 3 years ago, two firefighters, 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, to 10 hours a day, to 12 hours a day, from 5 days to 6 days to 7 days. And this past year, we started the year with an operation that was staffed 10 hours a day, 7 days a week. And this year, we transitioned to a 24/7 operation with 6 full-time firefighters and 3 part-time firefighters, 3 firefighters per shift. So the service level improvements have been remarkable in terms of how they moved up. But there's a cost to that service, and it's affecting our ability to restore service levels coming out of this pandemic to pre-pandemic levels, partly because of the cost of that operation. So the recommendation today is to try to answer some questions that you have initially about the data that you've seen, and then also talk about a next step. Should there be interest in continuing the conversation for a June ballot measure? And what we would recommend is to convene a council workshop. The staff report notes January 20th as a potential date. That's not a good date because of the workshop that we have related to the planning work. So we would look at a different day, perhaps the 19th of January, or another day between today and the January 25th council meeting. So let me pause there, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Prestwich, and thank you, Mr. Metz as well. That was really comprehensive overview that helps focus this conversation. And as Mr. Prestwich says, we want to sort of take the temperature of the council on proceeding and then look towards a workshop where we could sort of more finely tune an approach. And so getting some comments, some input from council, and then we'll open it to public comment. Is there any initial council input or comment at this point? Questions? And I am seeing no hands up. So I will go to public comment to get input there and then bring the conversation back to the council.
We do have public comment. Phone number ending in 5662. I'm going to allow you to speak. You should be able to unmute yourself and address the council.
Hello? Are we getting, I'm seeing a mute.
Hello.
Hello, we hear you now.
Yes.
Thank you, Jeff. Hey, this is Tom Belt here. I have a few comments and a couple of questions, and I'd just like to know, would you rather hear my comments or my questions first?
I think if you give the comments and then put the questions at the end, that may be the easiest way to organize it.
Okay. I just have to respond. I know I've only got 4 minutes, but I need to respond to Mark Prestwich's comment about the York Creek Dam and remind everyone that that project took the city 27 years to complete. And yes, it did take probably more than $9 million because the city's records don't go don't extend to before 2005. And I don't know, I think there's some lack of oversight that was a result of that project costing us so much. But I'm going to go ahead and start my comments. I'm one of 1,000 or more St. Helena registered voters that were not given the opportunity to comment on the city's recent survey to address the need for raising millions of dollars in revenue to complete past and present water and wastewater capital improvement projects. Consequently, I do not believe the survey results reflect a community-supported representation of the community's feelings on the survey. The way the survey was conducted, there are hundreds of St. Helena registered voters who had the opportunity to participate in the survey that do not pay a water or a wastewater bill directly to the city. In consideration that our water rates have increased over 400% in the last 11 years, I don't see how the survey replies from the registered voters have the same weight as a survey response from water customers who pay city water bills. And lastly, having been a St. Helena resident for 45 years and someone who has paid attention to the city's enterprise funding, I don't believe the problem of completing deferred capital improvement projects is limited to a revenue issue only. I believe the problem is more related to a need for more oversight by the long list of different city managers and public works directors employed by the city over the last 12 years. I recently finished a paper that I've submitted to the city council members and to our city on past deferred enterprise capital improvement projects and discovered the city was projected to receive over $31 million in revenue to complete capital improvement projects over the last 11 years, but has only spent $14 million towards the projects. Okay, that concludes my comments. My first question is, how many survey questions were sent to St. Helena registered voters who do not pay a direct bill to the city for water and wastewater use? And two, why didn't the original survey include comparing the benefits of obtaining the needed revenue to complete the projects from a revenue bond perspective instead of a general obligation bond, so that all of the water customers in St. Helena's water customer list would be paying for the bond interest? Thank you.
Thank you for the public comment, and we have those questions. I'll look to Mr. Presswich in terms of process. Are those questions we want to save until we get through public comment and then return to? Okay. We'll circle back on that. We'll keep going through public comment here. I'll look to our city clerk.
First name Richard, I'm going to allow you to speak. You should be able to unmute yourself and address the council.
This is actually Arlene Corsetti, not Richard Corsetti. That's okay. I would like to make a brief statement and then ask 4 questions to the council. I feel if they're very complicated, I would be just as happy to receive them, the answers on a formal basis at the next meeting. St. Helena has 2 financial areas it reports upon. The first is governmental and the second is business. The business portion of St. Helena's financials is the water and wastewater enterprise. The water and wastewater enterprise is a separate legal entity and has its own separate legal requirements. One of these requirements is that the entity must be self-supporting solely through the collection of water and wastewater rate payments from its users. It cannot be subsidized by an outside source such as the city of St. Helena. One of the reasons this enterprise was set up separately is that a portion of the users of water and wastewater do not reside within the St. Helena city limits and do not pay any taxes to the city. By making the enterprise self-supporting, it equitably distributes the cost of waste management, water, and capital improvements to all enterprise users, not just those within the city limit. One of the large areas of future costs of the city is fixing broken infrastructure, such as the wastewater plant, Bell Canyon intake tower, failing city water piping, and the installation of purple pipe. This is at least $50 million. There are 2 types of bond financing available: general obligation bonds and revenue bonds. Up until now, the water enterprise has used revenue bonds to fund infrastructure rebuilds. This was because the enterprise must fund its own financials and cannot receive money from St. Helena to do this. St. Helena is trying to float a general obligation bond. Given the information I just stated, and given that $50 million of our infrastructure issues are related to the water enterprise, I'm asking the following questions. Have the city council members actually read the water enterprise governing document? Did you look at the covenants of existing water revenue bonds? 2, did the city council ever make public the information to St. Helena voters about the water enterprise and its need to use water revenue bonds for funding and not general obligation bonds? Was this information given to the people you surveyed? 3, if you can't use general obligation money to fund repairs to the water and wastewater system, what are you actually planning on doing with this money? And 4, if you did improperly use a general obligation bond to fund water and wastewater repairs, how do you explain to the people of St. Helena that they will be paying for, funding, and supporting this cost for all the users outside the city limits, including all the large wineries and entities like Meadowood? Thank you.
Thank you for the comments and those questions as the speaker had asked can be looked at by our staff and our city attorney, et cetera. And we'll circle back in terms of response on those questions. Is there additional public comment?
Yeah.
Mayor, could I make one comment first?
Yes, I'm seeing Mr. Walsh, our city attorney.
I would just suggest that it may be beneficial to get thorough answers to Ms. Corsetti's questions if she submitted them in writing. It sounded like she may have been reading her comments. So if she submitted it in writing, I think that would be helpful.
Okay, that's good to pass on. She may still be on, and we'll make that suggestion that she sends those questions in. Thank you. And going back to our city clerk to see about additional public comment. And I am seeing that we're closing in on 9. Can we get, I think we need to do a vote for perhaps an additional 15 minutes.
So moved.
I'll second.
And a roll call, please.
Councilmember Hardy,
Yes.
Councilmember Hall,
Yes.
Councilmember Shuto,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Doring,
Yes.
and Mayor Ellsworth.
Yes. Thank you. So then now we'll go back to public comment and we'll get, see if there's any additional public comment.
Yes. First name Alan, I'm going to allow you to speak. You should be able to unmute yourself and address the council.
Okay, very good.
There we go.
Let me say as a prerequisite that in general, I agree fully with Ms. Corsetti's comments. The water and wastewater operations are, quote, enterprises, end quote. The rates need to support those enterprises, including all capital improvements. Yes, it is not illegal to support them from the general fund, but for sure, under well-established governmental financing practices, that is not proper. And we need to run our city in the context of proper, well-recognized financial practices. Now, having said that, given the great demands on these enterprises, there's no doubt that will cause great hardship. But the way to deal with that is from general fund subsidies to those that need it. That's an appropriate social service way to go, well recognized in municipal finance. So as you think through this, if there's any thought that general funds or property taxes would be used to support enterprise improvements, it will draw my strongest opposition, and it will be joined by others, including, for example, I believe, Mark Smithers. It won't pass. It's a hard thing for me to tell you that this is what will happen, but I think I have sufficient political viability in the city to tell you that. With respect to general fund increases, if all of you are behind it, meaning sales tax increase or TOT increase, and I would support that, of course, but that has to be for general fund purposes. You are in a very tough spot. I know that some of you believe me to think, perhaps appropriately, too much in terms of black and white, but on this issue, quite frankly, I don't see much for room of gray. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you for the public comments. I will see if there are additional public comments.
There are no additional public comment.
Thank you. So I'm going to bring it back to the council with looking to Mr. Presswich as well. The idea that the questions working forward with this, working towards a workshop to sort of dial this in. I know we've discussed perhaps what versions may be of a general obligation bond, a revenue bond related to the enterprise funds. And so in a workshop, if I look to Mr. Presswich, this is where we can sort of dial in using the data and information we have. We can sort of try to focus this a bit more.
Right. What we can do is really get into some details related to the types of projects that would be potentially considered. We can contrast options related to a general obligation bond versus a revenue bond, or both, and what the same scale of adjustment to our water and sewer rates would look like under that circumstance. It would be an opportunity to talk about the fact that we do not have any dollars set aside for replacement of storm drains, and how will we support investment in setting aside dollars for storm drain replacement. And in terms of the June versus November ballot timing, if there's any interest in a June ballot measure, which would be continuing the conversation related to a general obligation bond and learning more about the contrast between that option as well as a revenue bond option through rates. And by the way, we're out to bid now, or we have an RFP on the streets to begin working on our water rates and sewer rates that would be put in place beginning next November for an adjustment. And so if there's an interest in continuing the conversation for June, we would look to scheduling a workshop sometime between today and January 25th. We can continue that to a meeting, to the council meeting of January 25th and focus largely on that discussion. But I think this is a conversation that's probably better for a workshop on a different day.
Thank
you. And then use the 25th for any follow-up questions before bringing you a potential ordinance on February 8th.
Okay, and so I'm going to check in with the council here to see about input and if there's consensus to look towards a workshop. So I'll see Councilmember Chateau first.
Thank you. I just was wanting to ask: has there been any thinking about ways to separate out projects for doing a general obligation bond that would only impact or be projects that are within the city? Taking out the projects like the Bell Canyon, and that would be separate, that are outside the city. I'm just looking for ways to make it more equitable. And I didn't see that in any of the comments yet today. I was wondering if there's any more thinking on that.
Right. Thank you, Councilmember Chateau. The staff has consulted with the city attorney to evaluate whether a general obligation bond could be written in a way that limits the investments to infrastructure within the city limits. And in the conversation I've had with the city attorney, my understanding is that is possible. And we can speak to more of that at a workshop. The staff has taken a look at a list of projects that approximates $50 million. What we also want to do when we look at the list of projects out there and prioritize that work, we also want to identify projects that we believe we can actually deliver within a 5-year time frame, let's say. And so when we looked at projects that were inside the city limits and those that might be considered outside the city limits benefiting every customer, such as the 12-inch water main from Rutherford to St. Helena, that is a piece of infrastructure that needs to be replaced. It has to be either supported via some form of a bond, or whether it's a general obligation bond or a revenue bond. This is a pipe that delivers about a third of our water from Napa. It's original. It's failing. We've had our public works crews dealing with leaks, I think 5 times in the last 2 months. It's literally on its last legs and has to be replaced near term. And it is vulnerable to a catastrophic failure, as I was referencing the language from the Infrastructure Financing Task Force. And we believe approximately half of the projects like that would be projects that we would recommend for a revenue bond via the rates. And there may be about half of that, approximately 25 million, that may be projects that would be inside the city limits, rather than serving every customer outside the city limits. So we have taken a preliminary look at that.
Thank you. And now I'm seeing Councilmember Hardy.
Yeah, so I have a question for Mr. Metz. My understanding of the presentation on the polling is that as far as a bond measure, that was asking likely voters about general obligation bond measure. So is it possible to make any useful inferences from that data if instead the same kinds of projects are addressed through a revenue bond measure? And and there's another question. I don't know if you can answer, Mr. Mest. It may be a question for the city attorney, but then I'm also thinking that making that change may also change the voting pool. Would a revenue bond for the enterprise fund be voted on by all the customers, or would it just be voters in the city limits? So I have two questions, one for Mr. Walsh and one for Mr. Metz. Thank you.
Why don't I answer mine first, because that may address Mr. Metz's. A revenue bond measure, if we were to do a revenue bond, we would do a rate increase, which would be subject to Prop 218, but it wouldn't be subject to a vote.
And because of that, we can't really draw an inference from the survey about what the prospects for a revenue bond would be. It's a different population that would be weighing in with a different form of vote and a different underlying sort of cost benefit proposition.
Thank you. Thank you both. That's very helpful.
Thank you. So any additional council comments at this point? I'm seeing Councilmember Hall.
Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you, Mr. Metz, for your work and walking through the presentation. I thought it was very clear. I also just wanted to thank the community for recognizing the need here. And what's surprising is I'm not sure. I mean, you've got to do a lot of digging actually to really understand the depth and the urgency of our infrastructure repair. And I shouldn't call it repair, it's infrastructure replacement. That's really what's required in the city. So I want to thank the community. It's great to see their awareness of the issue, their commitment to want to help get it figured out. It's long overdue. It's decades of frankly, abandonment is kind of how I view it. But that's we can't do incremental tweaks and adjustments. Our city needs a change of trajectory. That's where we're at. And this conversation tonight is, 6 years ago, the very first long-range financial forecast talked about the need to one day have to bite the bullet because the city wasn't addressing its issues 6 years ago. And here we are 6 years down the road, and this is exactly what staff said was going to happen. So I'm happy. It's unfortunate to be here, but I'm glad to see we're turning the wheels to get it addressed. Folks come here, they spend millions of dollars on their homes, and one day soon they may try to turn on their kitchen tap and find no water and have no quick way of getting it addressed. So the sooner we get into this workshop and get all of our questions answered, I like the idea. Let's go through and consider what's the differences here between revenue and a geo bond. I think the sooner we can do that, the better. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And we'll move now to back to Councilmember Hardy and then Vice Mayor Doring.
Thank you. With respect to the state of our infrastructure, my thoughts tend to go first to something I discovered when doing research on history of the city's water system, prompted in large part by some questions and concerns Tom Belt had raised. This was several years ago. Not even remembering which year I discovered this, but I actually found myself reading the city council minutes from the meeting at which the council approved that 12-inch water main to Rutherford. It was in 1948. And to my surprise, never seen this anywhere else, the council minutes showed that the council rejected all bids for the project and voted to proceed with day labor. It was a time when the city urgently needed that water main. Belt Canyon had not been constructed. The city had negotiated a contract. The city of St. Helena had negotiated a contract, a long-term contract for water with the city of Napa. And a bond measure to fund it had just failed. They didn't get enough voter support. That must have been a general obligation bond. It failed at the polls. And so, again, they rejected all bids and elected to proceed with day labor. But another important point, and I bring this up from time to time because I think it's so easy to forget. When I discovered those minutes, at the time I delivered that information to City Hall, no one on staff knew how old that water main was. The physical infrastructure frequently gets our attention, as it should, but what is, I believe, chronically overlooked. It's been a concern of mine for over 30 years now. I raised it repeatedly in my first term on the city council, which was from 1990 to 94. It's the neglect of what I call our administrative infrastructure, and in particular, the neglect of records. The fact that we did not know how our water system was put together and how old some of the most crucial pieces of it are. That's a very telling sign of a kind of deferred maintenance that actually has consequences for our physical infrastructure. If we don't know things need to be replaced, we're in real trouble. So I want to be sure we don't forget that. And there are pieces of that water system that are older than that 12-inch main to Rutherford. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the comments. I apologize to Vice Mayor Doring, the queue, in my order in the queue there. So I want to make sure he's got time for his comments to come in.
Thank you, Mayor. I tend to agree with the comments by Ms. Corsetti and Mr. Galbraith about the equitable issues in terms of funding those outside of the city without having them have to pay for it. So I'm inclined to take a closer look at the revenue bonds, but I am cognizant of the fact that those rates are going to end up being oppressively burdensome on a lot of our ratepayers. And we have to take that into consideration. And so one of the questions I would like to have asked and answered in the workshop, which I agree we should have, is what kind of subsidies are we talking about from the general fund, which Mr. Galbraith talks about? Are we talking thousands of dollars, or are we talking millions of dollars? If we're going to take care of the issues that Mr. Hardy and Mr. Hall and others have talked about, we really need to get a handle on that. I think it's an interesting argument that you're not supposed to use the general fund, but you're okay with using subsidies. I actually am okay with using general fund subsidies because it's just unbelievably unfair to put that burden on all ratepayers. And I think we need to hone in on that. So we need to do a little bit of a thought experiment to see, well, how much revenue do we need from the revenue bonds? And what is that limit where it's just, wow, that's too much money to put that burden on a lot of folks who can't afford that. I'd like to know what the subsidies would be. So it's a really good conversation. I understand the arguments on both sides, and we should be able to flesh that out. The need, I agree with all my colleagues, the need is absolutely there. It does take bold action. We cannot defer this for decades more. This council has to take care of business. So thank you.
Thank you. And I do believe that this is the opportunity with this council that we can push this forward and have the community support. And I concur with the council members, all the council members who recognize that this is a need that we must address now. So with that, we're coming up to our 9:15 on this item. Mr. Presswich, do you have direction on a workshop where we can suss out many of these details and questions?
Yes, I think we're going to need to poll the council's availability after this meeting. So we'll start that process tomorrow. The 19th or the 24th look like interesting days. We can also look at we can continue some form of the conversation on the 25th perhaps, but the 26th or the 27th are also options that may work well. So we'll start some of that outreach with you tomorrow morning and figure out a date that works. Once we identify a date that people are available, we'll make sure that the community knows that date and we'll put it on our calendar on the website.
Great, thank you. And Mr. Metz, thank you very much for this work and focus, and thanks to the council for the input here and the community. Mr. Presswich, in terms of our final item, we keep kicking it. Is this something that still we can kick, or should we try to get another 5 minutes here and see if we can do it?
This is up to the council. Happy to speak briefly about this or continue it to the next meeting.
Is there any objection?
It doesn't have a formal timing issue.
Okay. Is there any objection to continuing and just getting this one done? So I'll ask for another 15 minutes. We'll try to get it done in 5 from the council.
I'll move a 10-minute extension.
Second.
Okay, Councilmember Hardy,
Yes.
Councilmember Hall,
Yes.
Councilmember Shutel,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Doring,
Yes.
and Mayor Ellsworth.
Yes. So with that, we're coming to the consideration and proposed approval of the first reading of an ordinance amending Chapter 2.56 of the St. Helena Municipal Code pertaining to the Parks and Recreation Commission. And this is our city manager.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be brief. The Parks and Rec Commission formed an ad hoc committee to look at the language in the municipal code that governs the duties and responsibilities of the commission. And we had noticed at the staff level that some of the language looked dated. It didn't reflect the current practices that we had in place with respect to how we worked with the commission directly. It didn't reflect the actual membership of the committee of the commission. And in June, at the June 21st, 2021 Parks and Rec Commission meeting, the ad hoc committee shared recommendations with a full commission, and they endorsed changes that are identified in track changes as an attachment. There's both a track change version, a red line, as well as a clean ordinance. And really what these changes are recommended to do is reflect the way that the commission works today, provide a more modern approach to the work that they do, which is they do serve as an advisory body to the city council. And we hope that the language changes that have been identified here, the council sees merit in these changes. The staff is supportive of these and would recommend approval moving forward on this. So this is a first reading tonight of an ordinance.
Thank you. So I'll look to council for questions or input here. And I'm seeing none. So I will open the public comment and look to our city clerk.
There is no public comment.
Okay, we'll bring it back to the council, see if there's any questions or input, and I'll look for a motion.
I'll move approval of the staff recommended action,
I'll second.
And a roll call, please.
which includes title only and waive the further reading. It's in the recommendation. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Doring,
Yes.
Councilmember Chateau,
Yes.
Councilmember Hardy,
Yes.
Councilmember Hall,
Yes.
and Mayor Ellsworth.
Yes. So with that, that's our last item, unless there are any other pertinent comments on, as we close. I'll wish everybody a great new year. Let's all have a great new year together, make great progress, and thank you everybody for all your focus and attention and work. Very much appreciated.
Good night.
Thank
night.
you. Have a good night.
Night.
Good work.
Recording stop.